You think it might be Andy? It's possible. The timescale looks like it might fit. But what would he have been doing in the caves? He was an outdoor kind of guy. One of the things he liked about being a union official was never having to go underground again. We don't know yet that it was your brother, Karen said. Those are questions for later, Angie. We still have to identify the remains. Do you happen to know who your brother's dentist was? How did he die? We're not sure yet, Karen said. As you'll appreciate, it's been a long time. It's a bit of a forensic challenge. I'll keep you informed, of course. But in the meantime, we have to treat it as an unexplained death. So, Andy's dentist? He went to Mr. Torrance in Buckhaven, but he died a couple of years before I left Scotland. I don't even know if there's still a practice there. She sounded slightly panicked. Shock kicking in, Karen thought. But don't worry, we'll check it out, she said. DNA, Angie blurted out. Can you get DNA from what you found? Yes, we can. Can we arrange for your local police to take a sample from you? You don't need to. Before I left for New Zealand, I arranged with my lawyer to hold a certified copy of my DNA analysis. There was a crack in her voice. I thought he'd gone off a mountain, or maybe walked into a loch with his pockets full of stones. I didn't want him lying unclaimed. My lawyer has instructions to provide my DNA analysis to the police where there's an unidentified body the right age. Karen heard a sob from the other side of the world. I always hoped. I'm sorry, Karen said. I'll get in touch with your lawyer. Alexander Gibb, Angie said, in Kirkcaldy. I'm sorry, I need to go now. The line went dead abruptly. Not too late then, Phil said. Karen sighed, shook her head. Depends what you mean by too late. Hoxton, London. Jonathan speed-dialed Belle's mobile. When she answered, he spoke quickly. I can't chat. I've got a meeting with my tutor. I've got some stuff to email you. I'll get to it in an hour or so. But here's the headline news. Daniel Porches is dead. I know that, Belle said impatiently. What you don't know is that he died in 1959, aged 4. Oh, shit, Belle said. I couldn't have put it better myself. But here's the kicker. In November 1984, Daniel Porches registered the birth of his son. Belle felt lightheaded, realised she was holding her breath and released it in a sigh. No way. Trust me, this is the business. Our Daniel Porches somehow managed to have a son 25 years after he died. Wild. And who was the mother? Jonathan chuckled. This just gets better, I'm afraid. I'm going to spell it out to you. Fredacallow is the name on the birth certificate. Say it out loud, Belle. Frida Kahlo. Sounds like Frida Kahlo, the cheeky bastard. He has a sense of humour, our Daniel Porches. Dundee. Karen found River at the university, sitting at her laptop in a small room lined with shelves of plastic boxes crammed with tiny bones. What in the name of God is this place? She said, plonking herself down on the only other chair. The professor here is the world's leading expert in the bones of babies and young children. You ever seen a fetus's skull? Karen shook her head. And I don't want to, thank you very much. River grinned. Okay, I won't make you. Let's just say when you've seen that, you understand where E.T. comes from. So I take it this isn't a social visit. Karen snorted. Oh, sure. The anatomy department of Dundee University is my #1 destination when I want a good day out. No, River, this is not a social visit. I'm here because I need a clear chain of custody on a piece of evidence in a homicide inquiry. She placed a sheet of paper on the desk. Angela Kerr's solicitor had been quick off the mark. This is the DNA of Andy Kerr's sister Angie. I'm formally requesting that you compare it with the DNA extracted from the human remains discovered in the area known as the Thanes Cave lying between East Weems and Buckhaven. You'll get that in writing as soon as I get back to my desk. River looked at it with curiosity. Fast work, Karen. Where did this come from? She asked. Angie Mackenzie is a woman of foresight, Karen said. She lodged it with her lawyer, just in case a body ever turned up. As she spoke, River was tapping keys on her laptop. I'll do you a detailed report in writing, she said slowly, distracted by what she was looking at. And I'll need to scan this in to be certain, but Quick and Dirty says these two people are closely related. She looked up. Looks like you might have an ID for your mystery man. Siena. How, Belle wondered, could Italian investigative journalists cope? She thought British bureaucracy wearisome and cumbersome. But compared to Italian red tape, it was open access all areas. First there had been the office-to-office shuttle, then the form-filling shuffle, then the blank stared shutout from officials who clearly minded their leisure being interrupted by someone who wanted them to do their job. It was a miracle anyone ever managed to find out anything in this country. Towards the end of the morning, she began to fear that time would run out before she learned what she needed to know. Then, with minutes to go before the registry office closed for lunch, a bored-looking bottle blonde called her name. Belle rushed to the counter, fully expecting to be fobbed off till the next day. Instead, in exchange for a bundle of unreceipted euros, she was handed 2 sheets of paper that appeared to have been photocopied on a machine painfully short of toner. One was headed Certificato di Morte, the other Certificato di Residenza. In the end, she'd got more than she'd bargained for. The death certificate of Daniel Simeon Porches stated simply that he had died on the 7th of April 2007 at the age of 52 at the Policlinico La Scotta, Siena. His parents were named as Nigel and Rosemary Porches, and that was it. No cause of death, no address. About as much use as a chocolate teapot, Belle thought bitterly. She considered going to the hospital to see if she could find anything out, but dismissed the idea at once. Breaching the walls of officialdom would be impossible for someone who didn't know the system. And the chances of finding someone bribable who remembered Daniel Porches after this much time were remote and probably beyond her command of the language. With a sigh, she turned to the other certificate. It seemed to be a short list of addresses and dates. It didn't take her long to figure out this was a record of where Daniel had lived since he had come to the commune de Siena in 1986, and that the last address on the list was where he had been living when he died. Even more surprising was that she knew more or less where it was. Costopino was the last village she'd driven through on her way from Campora. The main road twisted down through its main street in a series of curves, the road flanked with houses, the occasional shop or bar tucked alongside. Belle practically ran back to the car in spite of the sweaty heat of the middle of the day. She gasped with gratitude as the air conditioning kicked in and wasted no time getting out of the car park and onto the road heading for Costopino. The man behind the counter of the first bar she came to provided excellent directions, and a mere 15 minutes after leaving Siena, she was parking a few doors down from the house where she expected to find Gabriel Porches. It was a pleasant street, wider than most in that part of Tuscany. Tall trees shaded the narrow pavements, and waist-high walls topped with iron railings separated small but well-kept villas from each other. Belle felt the pulse of excitement in her throat. If she was right, she could be about to come face to face with Katrina McLennan Grant's lost son. The police had failed twice, but Belle Richmond was about to show them all how it was done. So confident was she that she could hardly credit the sign on the front of the yellow stuccoed villa. She checked the numbers again to make sure she was standing before the right house. But there was no mistake. The dark green shutters were pulled tight. The plants in the tall terracotta pots that lined the driveway looked tired and dusty. Occasional weeds were poking through the gravel, and junk mail poked out of the mailbox. All of which reinforced the Si Vende sign with the name and number of an estate agent in nearby Sovasile. Wherever Gabriel Porches was, it looked like it wasn't here. It was a setback, but it wasn't the end of the world. She'd overcome bigger obstacles than this on her way to the stories that had built her reputation as someone who could deliver. All she had to do was formulate a plan of campaign and follow it through. And for once, if she came up against stuff she couldn't do, she could call on Brodie Grant's resources to make it happen. It wasn't exactly a comforting feeling, but it was better than nothing. Before she headed off for Sovasile, she decided to check out the neighbours. It wouldn't be the first time that somebody who knew they were being looked for went out of their way to make their home look uninhabited. Belle had already noticed a man on the loggia of a villa diagonally opposite the Porches' house. There had been nothing covert about the way he had been watching her walk up the street and study the sign. Time for a little stretching of the truth. She crossed the road and greeted him with a wave. "Hello," she said. The man, who could have been anywhere from mid-50s to mid-70s, gave her an appraising look, making her wish she'd worn a loose t-shirt rather than the close-fitting spaghetti-strap top she'd chosen that morning. She loved Italy, but God, she hated the way so many of the men eyed up women as if they were meat on the hoof. This one wasn't even good-looking, one eye bigger than the other, a nose like an ill-favoured parsnip, and hair spurting out the top of his vest. He smoothed down an eyebrow with his little finger and gave her a crooked smile. "Hello," he said, managing to make it sound freighted with meaning. "I'm looking for Gabriel," she said. She gestured over her shoulder to the house. "Gabriel Porches. I'm a friend of the family from England. I haven't seen Gabriel since Daniel died, and this is the only address I have, but it's up for sale, and it doesn't look like Gabe's still living there." The man stuck his hands in his pockets and shrugged. "Gabriel hasn't lived here for more than a year now. He's supposed to be studying someplace. I don't know where. He was back for a while before his father died, but I haven't seen him for a couple of months now." His smile reappeared, a little wider than before. "If you want to give me your number, I could call you if he shows up." Belle smiled. "That's very kind, but I'm only going to be here for a few days. You said Gabe's supposed to be studying." She gave him a look of complicity. "Like you think he's up to his old games?" It did the trick. "Daniel, he worked hard. He didn't mess about. But Gabe, he's always messing about, hanging out with his friends. I never saw him with a book in his hands. What kind of studying is he going to be doing? If he'd been serious, he'd have signed up at the university in Siena, so he could live at home and only think about his studies. But no, he goes off someplace he can have a good time." He tutted. "Daniel was sick for weeks before Gabe showed up. Maybe Daniel didn't tell him he was ill. He's always been a very private person," Belle said, making it up as she went along. "A good son would have visited regularly enough to know," the man said stubbornly. "And you've no idea where he's studying?" The man shook his head. "No. I saw him on the train one time. I was coming back from Firenze. So, somewhere up north. Firenze, Bologna, Padova, Perugia. Could be anywhere. Oh well, I guess I'll have to try the estate agent. I really wanted to see him. I feel bad about missing the funeral. Were many of the old crowd here?" He looked surprised. "It was a private funeral. None of us neighbours knew anything about it till it was all over. I spoke to Gabe afterwards. I wanted to pay my respects, you know. He said his father had wanted it that way. But now you're talking like there was something to miss." He took out a pack of cigarettes and lit up. "You can't trust kids to tell you the truth." There was no real reason why she should try to cover her tracks with someone she would never meet again, but she'd always believed in keeping her hand in. "What I was talking about was more of a gathering for some of Daniel's old friends, not a funeral as such." He nodded. "The arty crowd. Kept them separate from his friends in the village. I met a couple of them once. They turned up at the villa when a few of us were round there playing cards. Another English guy and a German woman." He hawked and spat over the stone balustrade. "I've Got no time for Germans. That Englishman, though. You'd have thought he was German the way he acted. Matias, Belle guessed. That's the one. High-handed. Treated Daniel like he was dirt. Like he was the one with the brains and the talent. And very amused to find Daniel playing cards with the locals. The funny thing was, Daniel let him get away with it. We didn't stick around, just finished the hand and left them to it. If that's your arty intellectuals, you can keep them. I never had much time for Matias myself, Belle said. Anyway, thanks for your help. I'll head over to Sovasili and see if the agents can put me in touch with Gabe. It was amazing how even the least promising encounter could add to your store of knowledge, Belle thought, as she set off again. Now she had a second source who thought Matias was English, in spite of his Teutonic name and German partner. A Brit who didn't acknowledge his roots, who had artistic leanings, a connection to the ransom notes, and a friendship with the man whose son looked eerily like Cat Grant and her father. It was starting to make a tantalizing shape in her mind. Two young men, struggling artists, aware of Cat Grant because she moved in the same circles, aware, too, of her father's wealth. They hatch a plan to feather their nests, kidnap Cat and her kid, make it look like some political thing, take off with the ransom, and never have to paint for anyone but themselves ever again. Say it fast. It sounds like a great idea. Only it all goes horribly wrong, and Cat dies. They're left with the kid and the ransom money, but now they're the focus of a murder manhunt. Professional criminals would know what to do and be cold-hearted enough to do it. But these are nice, civilised boys who thought they were indulging in something only marginally more serious than an art college prank. They've got a boat, so they just keep going across the North Sea to Europe. Daniel ends up in Italy, Matias in Germany, and somewhere along the line they decide not to kill or abandon the child. For whatever reason, they keep him. Daniel brings him up as his son. Cushioned by the ransom money, he sets them up in comfort, then, ironically, becomes a reasonably successful artist. But he can't cash in on his success with media interviews and personality-based marketing, because he knows he's a criminal on the run. And he knows his son is not Gabriel Porches. He's Adam McLennan Grant, a young man cursed with a distinctive face. It was an attractive scenario, no doubt about it. It begged questions, too. How did they get their hands on the ransom, given that they were floundering around in the dark, trying to find the dead woman who'd been carrying it? How did they outwit the tracking devices the cops had planted on the ransom? How did they get away by boat and not get spotted by the helicopter? How would a couple of art students have got hold of a gun back then? All good questions. But one she was sure she could finesse one way or another. She'd have to. This was too good to pass by, just for the sake of a few awkward details. She'd known she was onto a good thing, with her unique access to Brodie Grant. But this was infinitely better than she could have hoped for. This was the kind of story that would make her name. Establish her as one of that handful of journalists whose name alone stood for the story. Stanley with the discovery of Dr. Livingstone, Woodward and Bernstein with Watergate, Max Hastings with the liberation of Port Stanley. Now they'd be able to include Annabelle Richmond with the unmasking of Adam McLennan Grant. There were lots of gaps in the story at this point, but they could be filled in later. What Belle needed now was the young man known as Gabriel Porches. With or without his cooperation, she needed a sample of his DNA so Brodie Grant could establish whether this really was his missing grandson. And then her fame was assured. Newspaper features, a book, maybe even a movie. It was a thing of beauty. The estate agent's office was tucked in a side street, just off Via Nuova. The window was filled with A4 sheets, displaying photographs and a few details of each property. The Porches villa was there, its rooms and facilities enumerated without comment. Belle pushed open the door and found herself in a small grey office. Grey filing cabinets, grey carpet, pale walls, grey desks. The only inhabitant, a woman in her 30s, was like a bird of paradise by comparison. Her scarlet blouse and turquoise necklace blazed brightly, drawing the eye to her tumble of dark hair and perfectly made-up face. She was definitely making the most of what she had, Belle thought, as they made their way through the pleasantries. "I'm afraid I'm not actually in the market for a property," Belle said, making an apologetic gesture. "I'm trying to contact the owner of the villa you have for sale in Costelpino. I was an old friend of Gabriel Porches' father, Daniel. Sadly, I was in Australia when Daniel died. I'm back in Italy for a while, and I wanted to see Gabriel to pay my respects. Is it possible for you to put me in touch with him?" The woman rolled her eyes. "I'm really sorry, I can't do that." Belle reached for her wallet. "I could pay for your time," she said, using one of the traditional formulae for corruption. No, it's not that," the woman said, not in the least offended. "When I say I can't, that's what I mean. Not that I won't, I can't." She sounded flustered. "It's very unusual. I don't have an address or a phone number or even an email for Signor Porches. Not even a mobile phone. I tried to explain this was very unconventional, and he said so was he. He said now his father was dead, he planned to go travelling, and he didn't want to be tied down to his past." She gave a wry little smile. "The sort of thing young men think is very romantic. And the rest of us think is impossibly self-indulgent," Belle said. "Gabriel always had a mind of his own. But how are you supposed to sell the house if you can't contact him? How can he agree to a sale?" The woman spread her hands. "He phones us every Monday. I said to him, 'What if someone comes in on a Tuesday morning with an offer?' He said, 'In the old days people had to wait for letters to go back and forth. It wouldn't kill them to wait till the next Monday if they're serious about buying the house.'" "And have there been many offers?" The woman looked glum. "Not at that price. I think he needs to drop at least 5,000 before anyone will get serious. But we'll see. It's a nice house, it should find a buyer. He's emptied it too, which makes the rooms look so much bigger." Since Belle's next suggestion had been that she take a look round to see if there were any clues to Gabriel's whereabouts, the last revelation came as a disappointment. Instead, she fished a business card from her filofax, one of the ones that had her name, her mobile number, and her email address. "Never mind," she said. "Perhaps when he rings on Monday, you could ask him to get in touch. I knew his father for the best part of 20 years. I'd just like to get together." She handed the card over. Scarlet fingernails plucked it from her hand. "Sure, I'll pass the message on. And if you ever want a property around here..." She waved at the array of details in the window. "We've got a great selection. I always say we're on the unfashionable side of the autostrada, so the prices are lower, but the properties are just as beautiful." Belle walked back to the car, knowing there was nothing else she could do here. 5 days until Gabriel Porches would get her message. And then who knew whether he would get in touch? If he didn't, tracking him down would be a job for a private detective in Italy. Someone who knew the ropes and the right hands to ply with brown envelopes of cash. It would still be her story, but someone else could do the grunt work. Meanwhile, she needed to get back to Rothwell to see if she could nail down a chat with Fergus and Clare. Time to exploit the resources Brodie Grant had put at her disposal. She dialed Susan Charleston's number. "Hello, Susan," she said. "I need a flight back to the UK ASAP. Glenrothes." The trouble with cold cases, Karen thought, was that there were so many brick walls to run into. When there really was nothing you could do next. No obvious witness to interview. No convenient forensic samples to organise. At times like this, she was at the mercy of her wits, twisting the Rubik's Cube of what she knew in the hope that a new pattern would emerge. She'd interviewed everyone who might have been able to give her a lead on what had happened to Mick Prentice. In a way, That should have worked to her advantage when it came to investigating Andy Kerr's death, because she'd been talking to them in the context of a missing person inquiry. Unless they had something to hide, people were generally pretty open with the police when it was a matter of helping to track down those missing and missed. When it came to murder, they were more reluctant to talk. And what they did say was hedged with qualifications and anxieties. Theoretically, she knew she should go back to her witnesses and take fresh statements. Statements that might lead her to other witnesses who remembered what Andy Kerr was saying and doing leading up to his death. But experience told her it would be a waste of time, now suspicious death was on the agenda. Nevertheless, she'd sent the Mint and a bright new CID aide on a fresh round of interviews. Maybe they'd get lucky and pick up on something she'd missed. A girl could always hope. She turned to the Cat Grant file. She was stalled there too. Until she had a proper report from the Italian police, it was hard to see where she could make progress. There had been one stroke of luck in that area, however. She'd contacted Fergus and Clare's parents, hoping to find out where their son was working so she could arrange to interview him. To her surprise, Willie Sinclair had told her son would be arriving with his wife and children that very evening for their annual Scottish holiday. Tomorrow morning, she would have the chance to talk to Fergus and Clare. It sounded as if he was the only person left who might be willing to unlock Cat Grant's personality. Her mother was dead, her father was unwilling, and the files offered no clue to any close friendships. Karen wondered if the lack of friendships was a matter of choice or personality. She knew people so invested in their work that the lack of close human relationships was something they barely noticed. She also knew others who were desperate for intimacy, but whose only talent was for driving people away. She counted her blessings. She had friends whose support and laughter filled an important place in the pattern of her days. It might lack a central relationship at its heart, but hers was a life that felt solid and comfortable. What had Cat Grant's life felt like? Karen had seen women consumed by their children. Witnessing their adoring gaze, she'd felt uneasy. The children were human, not gods to be worshipped. Was Cat's child the centre of her world? Had Adam occupied her entire heart? It looked that way from the outside. Everyone assumed Fergus was the baby's father. But even if he hadn't been, one thing seemed clear. Adam's father had been banished from his life. It appeared that his mother had wanted him for herself alone. Or maybe not. Karen wondered if she was looking through the wrong end of the telescope. What if it hadn't been Cat who had cast out Adam's father? What if he'd had his own reasons for refusing to accept a role in his son's life? Maybe he didn't want the responsibility. Maybe he had other responsibilities. Another family whose call on him was thrown into relief by the prospect of another child. Maybe he'd only been passing through and had gone before she even knew she was pregnant. There was no denying that there were other possibilities worth considering. Karen sighed. She'd know more after she'd spoken to Fergus. With luck, he'd help her to narrow down some of her wilder ideas. Cold cases, she said out loud. They break your heart. Like lovers, they tantalised with promises that this time it would be different. It would start out fresh and exciting. You'd try to ignore those little niggles that you felt sure would disappear as you got to understand things better. Then suddenly, it would be going nowhere. Wheels spinning in a gravel pit. And before you knew it, it was over. Back to square one. She glanced up at Phil, who was working computer databases, trying to track down a witness in another case. Probably just as well it had never come to anything between them. Better to have him as a friend than to end up with bitterness and frustration measuring the distance between them. And then the phone rang. CCRT-DI Pirie speaking, she said, trying not to sound as pissed off as she felt. This is Capitano de Stefano from the Carabinieri in Siena, a heavily accented voice said. You are the officer I have talked to about the Villa Totti near Boscalata? That's right. Karen sat bolt upright, reaching for pen and paper. She remembered Di Stefano's style from their previous conversation. His English was surprisingly good, as far as vocabulary and grammar were concerned, but his accent was atrocious. He pronounced English as if it were an opera libretto, the stresses in peculiar places and the pronunciation bordering on the bizarre. None of that mattered. What mattered was the content, and Karen was prepared to work as hard as necessary to nail that down precisely. Thanks for calling. It is my pleasure, he said, every vowel distinct. So, we have visited the villa and talked to the neighbours. Who knew you could get 4 syllables out of neighbours? Thank you. What did you discover? We have found more copies of the poster you emailed to us. Also, we have found the silk screen it was printed from. Now we are processing fingerprints from the frame and other areas inside the villa. You understand, many people have been here, and there are many traces everywhere. As soon as we have processed the prints and other material, we will transmit our results as well as copies of prints and DNA sequences. I am sorry, but this aspect is not a priority for us, you understand? Sure, I understand. Is there any chance that you can send us some samples so we can run our own tests? Just in the interests of time, not for any other reason. Like everybody in my department thinks you're useless. See, this is already done. I have sent you samples from the bloodstain on the floor and other bloodstains in the kitchen and living area. Also, other evidence where we have multiple samples. So, I hope this will come to you tomorrow. What did the neighbours have to say? Di Stefano tutted down the phone. I think you call these people lefties. They don't like the Carabinieri. They're the kind of people who go to Genoa for the G8. They are more on the side of the people living illegally at the Villa Totti. So my men did not learn a great deal. What we know is that the people living here ran a travelling puppet show called Burlesque. We have some photos from a local newspaper, and my colleague is emailing them to you. We know some names, but they are the kind of people who can very easily disappear. They live in the world of the black economy. They don't pay taxes. Some of them are probably illegals. Karen could almost see him spreading his hands in a frustrated shrug. I appreciate how hard it is. Can you send me a list of the names you do have? I can tell you now. We only have first names for these people. So far, no family names. Dieter, Luca, Maria, Max, Peter, Rado, Sylvia, Matias, Ursula. Matias was in charge. I am sending you this list. Some of them, we think we know their nationality, but it's mostly guessing, I think. Any Brits? It does not look like it, although one of the neighbours thinks that Matias might have been English because of his accent. It's not a very English name. Maybe it wasn't always his name, Di Stefano pointed out. The other thing about people like this, they are always trying to be born again. New name, new history. So I am sorry. There does not seem to be very much here for you. I appreciate what you've been able to do. I know it's hard to justify manpower on something like this. Inspector, it looks to me as if there has been a murder in this villa. We are treating this as a possible murder investigation. We try to help you in the course of this, but we are more interested in what we think happened 3 months ago than what happened 22 years ago in your country. We are looking very hard for these people. And tomorrow, we bring in the body dogs and the ground-penetrating radar to see if we can find a burial site. It will be difficult because it is surrounded by woodland, but we must try. So you see, manpower is not the issue here. Of course, I didn't mean to suggest you weren't taking it seriously. I know what it's like, believe me. There is one more thing we have found out. I don't know if this matters to you, but there has been an English journalist here, asking questions. Karen was momentarily at a loss. Nothing had been released to the media. What was a hack doing sniffing around in her case? Then suddenly it dawned on her. Belle Richmond, she said. Annabelle, Di Stefano said. She was staying at a farm up the hill. She left this afternoon. She is returning to England tonight. The neighbours, they said she wanted to know about the Berest people. A teenager told one of my men that she was also interested in a couple of friends of Matias. An English painter and his son. But I have no names, no photos, no nothing. Maybe you can speak to her. Maybe the Boscolata neighbours think it's better to talk to a journalist rather than a cop. What do you think? Tragically, I think you might be right, Karen said bitterly. They exchanged pleasantries and empty promises to visit, and then the call was over. Karen screwed up a piece of paper and tossed it at Phil. Can you believe it? What? He looked up startled. Believe what? Fucking Belle Richmond, she said. Who does she think she is? Brodie Grant's private police force. What's she done? He stretched his arms above his head, grunting as he unkinked his spine. She's only been to Italy. Karen kicked her bin. Fucking cheeky bitch. Going out there and chatting up the neighbours. The neighbours that won't say much to the police because they're a bunch of unreconstructed lefties. Jesus Christ. Wait a minute, Phil said. Shouldn't we be pleased about that? I mean, that we've got somebody getting the dirt, even if it's not our colleagues in Italy. Can you come over here and look in my email inbox and show me the message from Belle Richmond telling us what she's dug up in bloody Tuscany? Can you maybe let your fingers do the walking through my in-tray and show me the facts she sent with all the information she's gathered out there? Or maybe it's my voicemail that I've lost the ability to access. Phil, she might have found out all sorts, but we're not the ones she's telling. Edinburgh Airport to Rothwell Castle. Belle watched the empty luggage carousel circling, exhaustion rendering her incapable of thought. A drive to Florence Airport, mysteriously hidden somewhere in the suburbs. A dismal journey via Charles de Gaulle, an airport surely designed by a latter-day Marquis de Sade, and still miles to go before she could sleep, and not even in her own bed. At last, suitcases and holdalls started to appear. Ominously, hers was absent from the first circuit. She was about to throw a tantrum at the ground services counter when her case finally came limping through, one latch hanging loose from its moorings. In her heart, she knew Susan Charleston had nothing to do with her miseries, but it was nice to have someone to lay a rational blame on. Please God she'd sent someone to pick her up. Her spirits should have risen when she emerged in the arrivals area to see there was indeed a chauffeur waiting for her, but the fact that it was Brodie Grant himself only emphasised her weariness. She wanted to curl up and sleep or curl up and drink. She did not want to spend the next 40 minutes under interrogation. He wasn't even paying her, now that she came to think about it. Just fronting her exes and opening doors for her, which wasn't exactly a bad gig, but in her book, it didn't entitle him to 24/7 service. Like you're going to tell him that. Grant greeted her with a nod, and they wrestled momentarily over the suitcase before Belle gave in gracelessly. As they hustled through the terminal, Belle was conscious of eyes on them. Brodie Grant clearly had street recognition. Not many businessmen achieved that. Richard Branson, Alan Sugar, but they were familiar TV faces, on screen for reasons that were nothing to do with business. She didn't think Grant would be noticed in London, but here in Scotland, the punters knew his face in spite of his media shyness. Charisma, or just a big fish in a small pond. Belle wouldn't have liked to hazard a guess. It wasn't just the punters. Outside the terminal, where signs and PA announcements strictly banned the parking of cars, an armed police officer was standing next to Grant's Land Rover. He wasn't there to warn Grant or give him a ticket. He was there to make sure nobody messed with the defender. Grant gave him a patriarchal nod as he loaded the case, then waved graciously as they drove off. "I'm impressed," Belle said. "I thought it was just royalty that got that sort of treatment." His face twitched, as if he wasn't certain whether she was being critical. "In my country, we respect success." "What, 300 years of English oppression hasn't knocked that out of you?" Grant started upright, then realised she was teasing him. To her relief, he laughed. "No, you're much keener to knock success than we are. I think you like success too, Annabelle. Isn't that why you're working up here, working with me, instead of uncovering some ghastly tale of rape and sex trafficking in London?" "Partly. And partly because I'm interested in finding out what happened." As soon as the words were out, she could have kicked herself for giving him the perfect opening. "And what have you found out in Tuscany?" he asked. As they raced through the night on empty roads, she told him what she had discovered and what she had surmised. "I came back because I don't have the resources to track Gabriel Porches down," she concluded. "D.I. Pirie might be able to kick the Italian cops into action." "We're not going to be talking to D.I. Pirie about this," Grant said firmly. "We'll hire a private investigator. He can buy us the information we need." "But you're not going to tell the police what I found out? You're not sharing the info with them? Or the photos?" She knew she shouldn't be shocked by the antics of the very rich, but she was taken aback by so adamant a response. "The police are useless. We can wrap it up ourselves. If this boy is Adam, it's a family matter. It's not up to the police to find him." "I don't understand," Belle said. "When we started this, you were the one who went to the police. Now you want to shut them out." There was a long silence. The dashboard lit up his profile against the night, the muscles in his jaw tight and hard. At last he spoke. "Forgive me, but I don't think you've entirely thought this through, Belle." "What have I missed?" She felt the old clutch of fear that news editors had always induced with their questioning of her copy. "You talked about a significant amount of blood on the kitchen floor. You thought someone who lost that much blood would probably be dead. That means there's a body somewhere. And now the police are looking. They'll probably find it. And when they find it, they'll be looking for a killer." "And Gabriel was there the night before they all disappeared. You think Gabriel will come under suspicion?" Belle said, suddenly getting it. "And if he is your grandson, you want him out of the picture." "You got there, Belle," he said. "More than that, I don't want the Italian police fitting him up because they can't find the real killer. If he's not around, the temptation is less, especially since there will be other, more attractive suspects on the ground. The Italian private eyes won't just be looking for Gabriel Porches." "Oh my God. He's going to have someone else fitted up, just as an insurance policy." Belle felt nauseous. "You mean you're going to find a scapegoat?" Grant gave her an odd look. "What an extraordinary suggestion. I'm just going to make sure the Italian police get all the help they deserve." His smile was grim. "We're all citizens of Europe now, Belle." Thursday, 5th of July, 2007, Kirkcaldy. Karen had conducted interviews in strange places before, but Ravenscraig Castle would probably have made the top 5. When she'd asked Fergus and Clare to meet her, he'd suggested the venue. "That way my wife can take the kids around the castle and down to the shore," he said. "This is our summer holiday. I don't see why we have to be cooped up just because you want to talk to me." The weather would have been as good an answer as any. Karen was sitting on the remains of a wall with her anorak collar turned up against a sharp breeze coming off the sea. Phil sat next to her, huddled into his leather jacket. "This better be worth it," he said. "I'm not sure whether it's rheumatism or piles I'm getting here, but I know it's not good for me." He's probably used to it, working on a hunting estate like he does. Karen squinted up at the sky. The cloud was high and thin, but she'd still have put money on rain by lunchtime. You know that back in the Middle Ages, this was the St. Clare family seat. That's why this part of Kirkcaldy's called St. Clare Town, Karen. Phil rolled his eyes. You think he's trying to intimidate us? She laughed. If I can survive Brodie Grant, I can survive a descendant of the St. Clares of Ravenscraig. Do you think this is him? A tall, rangy man walked through the castle gatehouse, followed by a woman almost as tall as him, and a pair of small, sturdy boys, each with a shock of bright blonde hair like their mother. The lads looked around them, and then they were off, running and jumping, clambering and exploring. The woman turned her face upwards, and the man planted a kiss on her forehead, then patted her back as she turned to chase the boys. He looked round and caught sight of the two cops. He raised a hand in greeting, and came towards them with quick, long strides. As he approached, Karen studied a face she'd only seen in 22-year-old photos. He'd aged well, though his face was weathered, the web of fine white lines around his sharp blue eyes a testament to time spent in the sun and wind. His face was lean, the cheeks hollow, the outline of the bones clear beneath the skin. His light brown hair hung in a fine fringe, making him look almost medieval. He wore a soft plaid shirt, tucked into moleskin trousers, lightweight walking boots on his feet. She stood up and nodded hello. "You must be Fergus Sinclair," she said, extending a hand. "I'm D.I. Karen Pirie, and this is D.S. Phil Parhatka." He took her hand in one of those tight grips that always made her want to slap the other's face with her free hand. "I appreciate you meeting me here," he said. "I didn't want my parents subjected to the bad old memories again." His Fife accent was almost completely gone. If she'd been pressed, Karen might have even placed him as a German with exceptionally good English. "No problem," she lied. "You know why we've reopened the case." He sat down on a piece of masonry, at right angles to Karen and Phil. "My dad said it was something to do with the ransom poster. Another copy's turned up?" "That's right, in a ruined villa in Tuscany." Karen waited. He said nothing. "Not that far from where you live," Phil said. Sinclair raised his eyebrows. "That's hardly on my doorstep." "About 7 hours driving according to the internet." "If you say so. I'd have said more like 8 or 9. Either way, I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, sir. Just setting the location in context for you," Phil said. "The people who were squatting the villa were a group of puppeteers. They call themselves Berest. The leaders were a couple of Germans called Matias and Ursula. Ever come across them?" "Christ," Sinclair said, exasperated. "That's a bit like asking a Scotsman if he ever ran across your auntie from London." "I don't think I've ever been to a puppet show, not even with the kids. And I don't know anyone called Matias. The only Ursula I know works in my local bank, and I doubt very much she's into puppets in her spare time." He turned to Karen. "I thought you wanted to talk about Kat." "We do. I'm sorry. I thought you wanted to know why we're reopening the case," she said earnestly, slipping easily into the good cop role. "I suppose you put it all behind you now, what with having a wife and kids." He dropped his hands between his knees, interlocking his fingers. "I'll never put it behind me. I still loved her when she died, even though she'd sent me packing. There wasn't a day went by that I didn't think of her. I wrote so many letters, sent none of them." He closed his eyes. "But even if I could put Kat behind me, I'll never be able to do the same with Adam." He blinked hard and caught Karen's eye. "He's my son. Kat kept me from him when he was tiny. but the kidnappers have kept him from me for 22.5 years. You think he's still alive? Karen asked gently. I know the chances are that he was dead within hours of his mother, but I'm a parent. I can't help hoping that somewhere he's walking around in the world, having a decent life. That's how I like to think of him. You were always sure he was your son, Karen said, even though Kat wouldn't acknowledge you as a father. You never wavered. He twisted his hands together. Why would I waver? Look, I know my relationship with Kat was on the skids by the time she got pregnant. We'd split up and got back together 6 times. We were hardly seeing each other at all, but we did spend the night together almost exactly 9 months before Adam was born. When we were having our difficulties, I asked her if there was someone else, but she swore there wasn't. And God knows she had no reason to lie. If anything, she'd have been better off saying she was seeing someone else. I'd have had to accept it was over then. So there wasn't anybody else in the frame. He unclenched his hands and splayed his fingers. He even had my colouring. I knew he was mine the first time I clapped eyes on him. You must have been angry when Kat refused to admit Adam was yours, Karen said. I was furious, he said. I wanted to go to court, to do all the tests. So why didn't you? Phil said. Sinclair stared down at the ground. My mum talked me out of it. Brodie Grant hated the idea of me and Kat being together. Considering he came from dirt poverty in Kelty, he had some pretty high and mighty ideas about who was a fit partner for his daughter. And it certainly wasn't a Gilly's son. He was practically dancing a jig when we split up, he sighed. My mum said if I fought Kat over Adam, Grant would take it out on her and my dad. They live in a tied cottage. Grant once promised my dad they could stay there for the rest of their lives. They've worked all their days for low wages. They've got no other provision for their old age. So I bit the bullet for their sakes, and I took myself off where I didn't have to face Kat, or her father, every day. I know you were asked this at the time, but did you ever consider taking revenge on these people who had wrecked your life? Karen asked. Sinclair's face screwed up, as if he was in pain. If I'd had any notion of how to take revenge, I would have. But I didn't have a clue, and I didn't have any resources. I was 25 years old. I was working as a junior keeper on a hunting estate in Austria. I worked long hours. I spent my time learning the language and drinking, trying to forget what I'd left behind. Believe me, Inspector, the idea of kidnapping Kat and Adam never crossed my mind. I just don't have that kind of mind. Would it have crossed yours? Karen shrugged. I don't know. Happily, I've never been put in that position. I do know that if I'd been treated like you were, I'd have wanted to get my own back. Sinclair's sideways nod conceded her point. Here's what I know. My mum always used to say that living well is the best revenge, and that's what I've tried to do. I'm lucky to have a job I love, in a beautiful part of the world. I can shoot and fish and climb and ski. I've got a good marriage and 2 bright, healthy boys. I don't envy any man, least of all Brodie Grant. That man took everything I valued away from me. Him and his daughter, they hurt me. No getting away from it. But I've rebuilt my life and it's a good one. I've got history that's left me with scars. But those 3... He pointed to where his wife and sons were scrambling up a grassy bank. Those 3 make up for a hell of a lot. It was a pretty speech, but Karen wasn't entirely convinced by it. I think I'd resent him more in your shoes. Then it's just as well you're not. Resentment isn't a healthy emotion, Inspector. It'll eat you away like cancer. He looked her straight in the eye. There are those who believe there's a direct connection between the two. Me? I don't want to die of cancer. My colleagues interviewed you after Kat died. I expect you remember that quite well. His face twisted, and suddenly Karen saw a glimmer of the fires that Fergus and Clare kept well banked down. Being treated as a suspect in the death of the woman you love, That's not something you forget very easily, he said, his voice tight with contained anger. Asking someone for an alibi isn't necessarily treating them as a suspect, Phil said. She could tell he'd taken a dislike to Sinclair, and hoped it wouldn't derail the interview. We have to exclude people from our inquiries so we don't waste time investigating the innocent. Sometimes alibi evidence is the quickest way to take someone out of the picture. Maybe so, Sinclair said, his chin jutting forward defensively. It didn't feel like that at the time. It felt like your people were putting a hell of a lot of effort into proving I wasn't where I said I was. Time for the oil on the water, Karen thought. Is there anything that has occurred to you since then that might be helpful? He shook his head. What could I know that would be helpful? I've never been remotely interested in politics, never mind anarchist splinter groups. The people I mix with don't want a revolution. He gave a self-congratulatory little smile. Unless maybe it's a revolution in ski design. To tell you the truth, we don't think it was an anarchist group, Karen said. We have pretty good intelligence in the kind of people who believe in direct action, in the furtherance of their political ambitions. And the anarchist Covenant of Scotland was never heard from before or since. Well, they weren't going to draw attention to themselves afterwards, were they? Not with charges of murder and kidnap hanging over their heads. Not under that name, no. But they walked away with £1 million in cash and diamonds. That would be over 3 million in today's money. If they were dedicated political animals, you'd expect to see chunks of that money turning up in the coffers of radical groups with similar aims. My predecessors in the case asked MI5 for a watching brief. In the 5 years after Kat's murder, it never happened. None of the groups of fringe nutters suddenly came into money. So we don't think the kidnappers were really a bunch of political activists. We think they were likely closer to home. Sinclair's expression said it all. And that's why I'm here. He couldn't get the sneer off his face. Not for the reason you think, Karen said. You're not here because I suspect you. She held up her hands in a gesture of surrender. We never managed to put you anywhere near the kidnap or the ransom scene. Your bank accounts never showed any unaccountable funds. Yes, I know you're pissed off to hear we checked your bank accounts. Don't be. Not if you really care about Kat or Adam. You should be pleased that we've been doing our job the best we can all these years. And that it's pretty much put you in the clear. In spite of the poison Brodie Grant has tried to plant about me. Karen shook her head. You might be pleasantly surprised on that score. But anyway, here's the point. You're here because you're the only person who really knew Kat. She was too like her father. I suspect they might have ended up best pals, but they were still in the fighting phase. Her mother's dead. She didn't seem to have close female friends. So that leaves you as my only way into Kat's life. And I think that's where the secret of her death lies. She pinned Sinclair with the directness of her gaze. So what's it going to be, Fergus? Are you going to help me? Sunday, 14th of August, 1983, Newton of Weems. Katrina McLennan Grant spun round on one toe, arms outstretched. Mine, all mine, she said, in mock Wicked Witch tones. Suddenly she stopped, staggering slightly with dizziness. What do you think, Fergus? Isn't it just perfect? Fergus Sinclair surveyed the dingy room. The gatehouse on the Weems estate was nothing like the plain but spotless cottage he'd grown up in. It was even further removed from Rothwell Castle. It wasn't even as appealing as the student houses he'd lived in. Having stood empty for a couple of years, it held no sense of its previous occupants. But even so, he found it hard to feel enthusiastic about it. It wasn't how he'd imagined them setting up home together. It'll be fine once we've gone through it with a bucket of paint, he said. Of course it will, Kat said. I want to keep it simple, bright but simple. Apricot in here, I think. She headed for the door. Lemon for the hall, stairs and landing. Sunshine yellow in the kitchen. I'm going to use the other downstairs room as an office, so something neutral. She ran up the stairs and leaned over the banister, smiling down at him. Blue for my bedroom. A nice, Swedish sort of blue. Sinclair laughed at her enthusiasm. Don't I get a say? Kat's smile faded. Why would you get a say, Fergus? It's not your house. The words slammed into him like a physical blow. What do you mean? I thought we were going to live together. Kat dropped onto the top step and sat there, knees tight together, arms folded around herself. Why did you think that? I never said anything about that. The ground beneath his feet seemed not to be stable. Sinclair clutched at the newel post for support. It's what we always talked about. We'd finish our training and move in together. Me keepering, you doing the glasswork. It's what we planned, Kat. He stared up at her, willing her to admit he was right. And so she did, but not in a way that made him feel any better. Fergus, we were hardly more than children then. It's like when you're little and your big cousin says he's going to marry you when you're older. You mean it all when you say it, but then you outgrow the promise. No, he protested, starting up the stairs. No, we weren't children. We knew what we were saying. I still love you as much as I ever did. Every promise I've made to you, I still want to keep them. He pushed himself down next to her, forcing her to shift right up against the wall. He put his arm round her shoulders, but still she kept her arms wrapped around her body. Fergus, I want to live by myself, Kat said, staring down to where he'd been a moment before, as if she was still speaking directly to him. This is the first time I've had my own workspace and my own living space. My head is bursting with ideas for things I want to make, and for how I want to live. I won't interfere with your ideas, Sinclair insisted. You can have everything just the way you want it. But you'll be here, Fergus. When I go to bed at night, when I wake up in the morning, I'll have to think about things like what we're going to eat and when we're going to eat it. I'll do the cooking, he said. He could feed himself. How hard could it be to feed both of them? We can do this on your terms. I'll still have to think about meal times and things happening at set times, not when it feels natural or right for my creative rhythms. I'll have to think about your washing, when you need to be in the bathroom, what you're going to watch on the TV. Kat was rocking to and fro now, the natural anxiety she'd always worked to hide coming to the surface. I don't want to have to deal with all that. But Kat, I'm an artist, Fergus. I'm not saying that like it's some precious state that sets me above everybody else. What I mean is that I'm kind of fucked up. I'm not good at being with people for extended periods of time. We seem to do okay together. He could hear the pleading in his voice, and he wasn't ashamed. She was worth shaming himself for. But we don't actually spend huge chunks of time together, Fergus. Look at the last few years. I've been in Sweden, you've been in London. We've spent the occasional weekend together, but mostly we've seen each other at Rothwell. We've hardly ever spent more than a couple of nights together, and that suits me fine. Doesn't suit me, he said gruffly. I want to be with you all the time. Like I said, we can do it on your terms. She slipped out from under his arm and dropped down a couple of steps, turning so she could look at him. Can't you see how scary that is for me? Just hearing you say it makes me feel claustrophobic. You talk about doing it on my terms, but none of my terms include having someone under the same roof as me. Fergus, you mean so much to me. There isn't anyone else who makes me feel the way you do. Please don't spoil that by pushing me or guilt-tripping me into something I can't bear the thought of. His face felt frozen, as if he was standing on top of Falkland Hill in a gale. The skin whipped hard against his bones, his eyes flayed to tears. It's what people do when they love each other, he said. Now she reached out her hand and put it on his knee. "It's one model for living," she said. "It's the most common one. But part of the reason for that is economic, Fergus. People live together because it's cheaper than living apart. Two can live as cheaply as one. It doesn't mean it's the best way for everybody. Lots of people have relationships that don't conform to that pattern. And those other ways of doing it work just as well. You think me not wanting to live with you means I don't love you. But Fergus, it's the other way around. Living with you would destroy our relationship. I'd go crazy. I'd want to kill you. It's because I love you that I don't want to live with you." He pushed her hand away and stood up. "You've spent too fucking long in Sweden," he shouted, feeling his throat tighten. "Listen to yourself. Models for loving, conforming to patterns. That's not what love is. Love is... Cat, where does affection and kindness and helping each other find a place in your world?" She stood up and leaned against the wall. "Same place they always have. Fergus, we've always been kind to each other. We've always cared for each other. Why do we need to change the shape of our relationship? Why risk all those beautiful things that work so well between us? Even sex. Everybody I know, once they start living together, the sex stops being so exciting. 2, 3 years down the line, they hardly ever fuck anymore. But look at us." She sidestepped up so she was level with him. "We don't take each other for granted. So when we see each other, it's still electric." She stepped forward, one hand flat in his chest, the other cupped under his balls. In spite of himself, he felt the hardening rush of blood. "Come on, Fergus. Fuck me," she whispered. "Here, now." And so she got her own way, as usual. Thursday, 5th of July, 2007. Like her father, she was very good at getting her own way. She was more subtle than him, but the end result was the same, Sinclair concluded. For the first time since the Macaroon briefed her, Karen felt she had a sense of who Katrina McLennan Grant had been. A woman who knew her own mind. An artist with a vision she was determined to realise. A loner who took pleasure in company when she was in the mood for it. A lover who only learned how to accept being pinned down after she became a mother. A difficult woman, but a brave one, Karen suspected. Can you think of anybody whose life touched hers that might have wanted to punish her? She asked. Punish her for what? You name it. Her talent, her privilege, her father. He thought about it. Well, it's hard to imagine. The thing is, she'd spent 4 years in Sweden. She just called herself Cat Grant. I don't think anybody over there had the faintest idea who Brodie McLennan Grant is. He stretched his legs out and crossed them at the ankles. She did summer school over here the first couple of years she was in Sweden. She hooked up with some of the people she knew from when she was at the Edinburgh College of Art. Karen sat up straight. I didn't know she was at the Edinburgh College of Art, she said. There was nothing in the file about that. All it says is that she studied in Sweden. Sinclair nodded. Technically that's right, but instead of doing the 6th year at her fancy private school in Edinburgh, she did a foundation course at the College of Art. It's probably not in the file because her old man didn't know about it. He absolutely didn't want her to be an artist, so it was a very big secret between Kat and her mum. She'd go off every morning on the train and come home at more or less the usual time, but instead of going to school, she went to the college. You really didn't know? We really didn't know. Karen looked at Phil. We need to start looking at the people who were on that foundation course. The good news is that there weren't many of them, Sinclair said. Only 10 or a dozen. Of course, she knew other students, but it was the ones on her course that she mainly hung out with. Can you remember who her pals were? Sinclair nodded. There were 5 of them. They liked the same bands. They liked the same artists. They were always going on about modernism and its legacy. He rolled his eyes. I used to feel like a complete hick from the sticks. Names, details. Phil putting the pressure on again. He reached for his notebook and flipped it open. There was a lassie from Montrose, Diana McCrae. Another from Peebles. What was her name? Something Italian. Demelza Gardner. Demelza's not Italian, it's Cornish, Phil said. Karen silenced him with a look. Whatever. Sounded Italian to me, Sinclair said. There were 2 lads as well. A guy from Crieff or some arsey place in Perthshire like that. Toby Ingalls. And finally Jack Docherty. He was a working-class tow rag from Glasgow. They were all nice, middle-class kids, and Jack was their performing monkey. He didn't seem to mind. He was one of those people who didn't care what kind of attention they get, as long as they get some. Did she stay in touch with any of them when she went to Sweden? Sinclair stood up, ignoring her, as his boys raced across the grass towards him. They threw themselves on him in an excited torrent of what Karen took to be German. Sinclair clung on to them, struggling forward a couple of steps, with them hanging on like baby chimps. Then he dropped them, said something to them, ruffled their hair, and sent them off in pursuit of their mother, who had disappeared towards the steps down to the shore. Sorry, he said, coming back and sitting down again. They always like to be sure you know what you're missing. To answer your question, I don't really know. I vaguely remember Kat mentioning one or other of them a few times, but I didn't pay much attention. I had nothing in common with them. I never met any of them again after Kat left the college. He ran a hand over his jaw. Looking back at it now, I think that the older we got, the less Kat and I had in common. If she'd lived, we would never have got back together again. You might have found some common ground over Adam eventually, Karen said. I'd like to think so. He looked longingly at the gateway his boys had disappeared through. Is there anything else? Only I'd kind of like to get back to my life. Do you think there was anyone from her art college days who might have harboured ill feeling towards her? Karen asked. Sinclair shook his head. Nothing she ever said would make me think that, he said. She had a strong personality, but she was a hard person to dislike. I don't remember her ever complaining that she'd been given a hard time by anybody. He stood up again, smoothing down his trousers. I have to say, I can't believe anyone who knew her would think they could get away with kidnapping her. She was far too good at getting her own way. Glenrothes. The Mint stabbed the keyboard with his index fingers. He didn't know why they called that fast business touch typing, because you couldn't type without touching the keyboard. It was all touch typing when you got down to it. He also wasn't sure why the boss kept lumbering him with the computer searches, unless it was just pure sadism. Everybody thought young guys like him were totally at home in front of a computer, but for the Mint, it was like a foreign country, where he didn't even know the word for beer. He'd have been much happier if she'd sent him off with a hat to the College of Art, to talk to real people and pore through yearbooks and physical records. He was better at that. And besides, DS Parhatka was a good laugh. There was nothing funny about trawling through the message boards and membership lists of www.bestdaysofourlives.com, searching for names the boss had dropped on his desk on a tatty page torn from a notebook. This was so not what he joined up for. Where was the action? Where were the dramatic car chases and arrests? Instead of excitement, he got the boss and the hat, acting like they were some ancient comedy partnership, like French and Saunders. Or was it Flanders and Swan? He could never get them straight in his head. He hadn't even had to monster anybody to get full access to the website. The woman he'd spoken to had fallen over herself to be helpful. Well, we've helped the police before. We're always happy to do what we can, she gabbled as soon as he'd made his request. Whoever she dealt with before had clearly left her in a state of shivering submission. He liked that in a source. He checked the list of names again. Diana McRae, Demelza Gardner, Toby Ingalls, Jack Docherty. 1977 to 78, the year he was looking for. After a couple of false clicks, he finally made it to the membership list. Only one of them was there. Diana McRae was now Diana Waddell, but it wasn't hard to figure that out. He clicked on Diana's profile. I followed my foundation course at the College of Art with a degree from Glasgow School of Art, specialising in sculpture. After graduating, I started working in the field of art therapy for people with mental illness. I met Desmond, my husband, when we were both working in Dundee. We married in 1990, and we have 2 children. We live in Glenisla, which we all adore. I have started sculpting in wood again, and have a contract with a local garden centre, as well as a gallery in Dundee. A gallery in Dundee? The Mint thought scornfully. Art? In Dundee? About as likely as peace in the Middle East. He skimmed through more rubbish about her husband and kids, then clicked through to her messages and emails from fellow ex-students. Why did these people bother? Their lives were as dull as an East Fife home game. After scrolling through a couple of dozen innocuous exchanges, he found a message from someone called Shannon. Do you ever hear from Jack Docherty? She asked. Darling Jack, we swap Christmas cards. Her smugness penetrated the notoriously nuance-free email. He's out in Western Australia now. He has his own gallery in Perth. He does a lot of work with Aboriginal artists. We have a couple of pieces from him. They're remarkable. He's very happy. He has an Aboriginal boyfriend, quite a few years younger than him and very handsome, but he sounds like a sweetheart. Once our two are off to uni, we're planning a trip out to visit. 2 birds with 1 stone, the Mint thought, scribbling the details down. He continued to the end of Diana's wittering correspondence, then decided he needed a break while he came up with his next move. A cup of coffee later, he got back to his search. Neither Toby Ingalls nor Demelza Gardner showed up anywhere on the College of Art area of the website. But thanks to the way his contact had rolled over, he was able to search the entire website. He typed in the woman's name, and to his complete astonishment, he got a hit. He clicked on the result and discovered Gardner described as totally my favourite teacher. The message was on the site of a high school in Norwich. At least he had the sense to Google the school. And there was Demelza Gardner, head of art. God, this computer stuff was a piece of piss once you'd got the hang of it. He tried Toby Ingalls' name in the search engine, and again came up with a hit. The Mint followed the link to a forum where former pupils of a private school in Crieff could rabbit on to their heart's content about their fabulous bloody lives. It took him a while to unravel the threads of correspondence, but at last he found what he was looking for. Feeling rather pleased with himself, the Mint tore off the top sheet from his notepad and went off in search of D.I. Pirie. It had, Karen thought, gone something like this. She had called Belle Richmond and invited her to come to CCRT for an interview as soon as possible, preferably within 1 hour. Belle had refused. Karen had mentioned the small matter of police obstruction. Then Belle had gone to Brodie Grant and complained she didn't want to trot off to Glenrothes at Karen Pirie's beck and call. Then Grant had called the Macaroon and explained that Belle didn't want to be interviewed and D.I. Pirie had better stop threatening her. Then the Macaroon had summoned her and given her a hard time for upsetting Brodie Grant and told her to lay off Belle Richmond. Then Karen called Belle Richmond again. In her sweetest voice, she had told Belle to present herself at CCRT at 2 o'clock. If you're not here, she said, there will be a squad car at Rothwell 10 minutes after that to arrest you for police obstruction. Then she'd put the phone down. Now it was 1:55, and Dave Cruikshank had just called her to say Belle Richmond was in the building. Get a uniform to take her up to interview 1, and wait with her till I get there." Karen got herself a Diet Coke out of the fridge and sat down at her desk for 5 minutes. She took a last swig from her can, then headed down the hall to the interview room. Belle was sitting at the table in the grey, windowless room, looking furious. A pack of red Marlboro sat in front of her, a single cigarette lying next to it. Clearly she'd forgotten. The Scots had banned smoking ahead of the English until the uniformed officer had reminded her. Karen pulled a chair out and dropped into it. The foam cushion had been worn into its shape by other buttocks than hers, and she wriggled to get comfortable. Elbows on the table, she leaned forward. "Don't ever try to fuck with me again," she said, her voice conversational, her eyes like glittering granite. "Oh, please," Belle said. "Let's not make this a pissing contest. I'm here now, so let it go." Karen didn't take her eyes off Belle. "We need to talk about Italy." "Why not? Lovely country, fabulous food, wine's getting better all the time, and then there's the art." "Stop it." "I mean it. I will charge you with police obstruction and put you in a cell and leave you there till I can bring you before a sheriff. I am not going to be jerked around by Sir Broderick MacLennan Grant or his minions." "I'm not a minion of Brodie Grant," Belle said. "I'm an independent investigative journalist." "Independent? You're living under his roof, eating his food, drinking his wine, which I bet is not Italian, by the way. And who paid for that little jaunt to Italy? You're not independent. You're bought and paid for." "You're wrong." "No, I'm not. I've got more freedom of action than you have right now, Belle. I can tell my boss to shove it. Come to think of it, I just have. Can you say the same? If it wasn't for the Italian police, I wouldn't even know you've been talking to people in Tuscany about the Villa Totti. The very fact that you've been reporting to Grant and not talking to us tells me that he owns you." "That's bullshit. Reporters don't talk to cops about their investigations till the work is finished. That's what's going on here." Karen shook her head slowly. "I don't think so. And to tell you the truth, I'm surprised. I didn't think you were that kind of woman." "You don't know anything about me, Inspector." Belle settled herself more comfortably in the chair, as if she was getting ready for something pleasurable. "I know you didn't earn your reputation spouting clichés like that." Karen pulled her chair closer to the table, cutting the distance between them to less than a couple of feet. "And I know that you've been a campaigning journalist for almost the whole of your career. You know what people say about you, Belle? They say you're a fighter. They say you're someone who does the right thing, even if it's not the easiest. Like the way you took your sister and her boy under your roof when they needed looking after. They say you didn't care about the popularity of your position. You drag the truth out, kicking and screaming, and make people confront it. They say you're a maverick, somebody who operates to her own set of rules, somebody who doesn't take orders from the man." She waited, staring Belle down. The journalist blinked first, but she didn't look away. "You think they'd recognise you now? Taking your orders from a man like Sir Broderick MacLennan Grant? A man who epitomises the capitalist system? A man who resisted his daughter's every attempt at self-determination to the point where she ended up putting herself in harm's way? Is that what you've come down to?" Belle picked up her cigarette and tapped it end to end on the table. "Sometimes you have to find a place inside the enemy's tent so you can find out what he's really like. You of all people should understand that. Cops use undercover all the time when there's no other way of getting a story. Do you have any idea how many press interviews Brodie Grant has given in the last 20 years? Taking a wild guess, I'd say none. Right. When I found a piece of evidence that might just crack this cold case open, I figured there would be a lot of interest in Grant. Publisher-type interest. But only if someone could get alongside Grant and see what he was like for real." She raised one corner of her mouth in a cynical half-smile. "I thought it might as well be me." "Fair enough. I'm not going to sit here and pick holes in your self-justification. But how does your quest to give the world the definitive book about that miserable family grant you the right to stand above the law? That's not how I see it. Of course it's not how you see it. You need to see yourself as the person who's acting on behalf of Cat Grant. The person who's going to bring her son home, dead or alive. The hero. You can't afford to see yourself in a true light, because that true light shows you up as the person who is standing in the way of all those things. Well, here's the scoop, Belle. You haven't got the resources to bring this to an end. I don't know what Brodie Grant's promised you, but it's not going to be clean, not in any sense. Karen could feel her anger coiling inside her, getting ready to spring. She pushed her chair back, putting some space between them. The Italian police don't care what happened to Cat Grant, Belle said. Oh, you're right, and why should they? Karen felt her face flush. But they do care about the person whose blood is all over the kitchen floor of the Villa Totti. So much blood, that person is almost certainly dead. They care about that, and they're doing everything they can to find out what happened there. And in the course of that, there will be information that will help us. That's how we do things. We don't hire private eyes who tailor their reports to what their clients want to hear. We don't construct our own private legal system to serve our own interests. Let me ask you a question, Belle, just between the two of us. Karen turned to the uniformed constable who was still standing by the door. Can you give us a minute? She waited till he had closed the door behind him. Under Scots law, I can't use anything you say to me now. There's no cooperation, you see, so here's my question, and I want you to think about it very carefully. You don't need to tell me the answer. I just want to be sure that you've thought about it honestly and sincerely. If you were to find the kidnappers, what do you think Brodie Grant would do with that information? The muscles round Belle's mouth tightened. I think that's a scurrilous implication. I didn't imply. You inferred. Karen got up. I'm not a numpty, Belle. Don't treat me like one. She opened the door. You can come back in now. The constable resumed his station by the door, and Karen returned to her chair. You should be ashamed of yourself, she said. Who the hell do you people think you are, with your private law? Is this what you've spent your career working for? A law for the rich and powerful that can thumb its nose at the rest of us? That hit home. About bloody time. Belle shook her head. You misjudge me. Prove it. Tell me what you found out in Tuscany. Why should I? If you people were any good at your job, you'd have found out yourself. You think I need to defend my ability? The only thing I have to defend is that our investigations struggle under the weight of rules and regulations and resources. That sometimes means it takes me and my team a while to cover the ground, but you can be sure that when we do, there's not a blade of grass goes unexamined. If you give a toss about justice, you should tell me. She gave Belle a cold smile. Otherwise, you might find yourself on the other end of the reporter's notebooks. Is that a threat? To Karen's ear, it sounded like bluster. Belle was close to spilling. She could sense it. I don't need to threaten, she said. Even Brodie Grant knows what a leaky sieve the police are. Stuff just seems to slip out into the public domain, and you know how the press love it when someone camped out on the moral high ground gets caught up in a mudslide. Oh yes, she was right. Belle was definitely growing uneasy. Look, Karen. I can call you Karen. Belle's voice dropped into hot chocolate warmth. Call me what you like. It makes no odds to me. I'm not your pal, Belle. I've got 6 hours to question you without a lawyer, and I plan to make the most of every minute. Tell me what you found out in Italy. I'm not telling you anything, Belle said. I want to go outside for a cigarette. I'll just leave my bag here on the table. Careful you don't knock it over. Things might spill out. She stood up. Is that okay with you, Inspector? Karen struggled not to smile. The constable would need to keep you company, but take your time. Make it 2. I've got plenty to keep me occupied. Watching Belle leave the room, She couldn't help a momentary flash of admiration for the other woman's style. Give it up without giving in. Nice one, Belle. Her arm brushed against the straw shopping bag, which fell over on its side, fanning a wedge of paper out onto the table. Without reading it, Karen scooped it up and hustled down the hall to her office. Into the photocopier, the whole bundle copied inside 10 minutes. A set of copies locked in her drawer, the originals in her hand. And back to the interview room, where she settled down to read. As she digested Belle's report for Brodie Grant, her mind arranged the bullet points. Mongrel bunch of puppeteers squatting the Villa Totti. Daniel Porches, British painter, not so much friend of the house as friend of Matias the boss and his girlfriend. Matias the set designer and poster maker. Gabriel Porches, son of Daniel, seen with Matias the day before Burress scattered to the four winds. Blood on the kitchen floor, fresh that morning. Daniel Porches a fake. Already a fake in November 1984, when he registered his son's fake birth. She stumbled for a moment on the mother's name, knowing she'd come across it but struggling for context. Then she said it out loud and it clicked. Frida Kahlo. The Mexican artist that Michael Mara wrote the song about. Frida Kahlo's visit to the Taybridge bar. She had a bad time with her man, so nothing new there then. But somebody was being a smart arse with the registrar, laughing up his sleeve at some minor civil servant who wouldn't know Frida Kahlo from Michelangelo. Showing off. Thinking he was being clever but not realising he was saying something about himself in the process. He must have been a skillful forger, though, this Daniel Porches, to turn up with all the necessary documentation to convince the registrar, and bold to carry it through. It was all very interesting, but what had convinced Belle that Gabriel Porches wasn't Adam McLennan Grant, and by logical extension, Daniel Porches his biological father, and by extending the logic further, that Daniel Porches and Matias were the kidnappers? Still in touch, after all these years, still in possession of the original silk screen. Based on the poster, you could draw the thread through, but it was only circumstantial. Aware that Belle would be back any moment, Karen flicked forward through the pages, skimming for sense, hunting for something that might anchor the theory to solid fact. The last few pages were photographs, originals taken at some party, and enlarged sections with captions. Her stomach flipped, and her mind at first refused to accept what she was looking at. Yes, it was true that the boy Gabriel bore a striking resemblance to both Brodie and Cat Grant. But that wasn't what had provoked the turmoil inside. Karen stared at the image of Daniel Porches, nausea churning her guts. Dear God, what was she to make of this? And then, with the suddenness of a light coming on, she realised something that turned everything on its head. Daniel Porches had registered the birth of his son 3 months before the kidnap. He'd assumed a fake identity at least 3 months ahead of the time that he was going to use it to make his getaway. Fair enough. It demonstrated forethought. But he'd also established the right to take his son with him. You don't do that if you're planning to ransom him, she said under her breath. Karen stuffed Belle's papers back in the straw bag and headed for the door. This was insane. She needed to talk to someone who could help her make sense of this. Where the hell was Phil when she needed him? As she burst out of the interview room, she practically collided with the Mint. He sidestepped, looking startled. "I was looking for you," he said. Definitely not mutual. "I can't stop now," she said, pushing past him. "I've got this for you," he said plaintively. Karen whirled round, grabbed the sheet of paper and broke into a run. She felt as if an army of messengers were running round inside her head, each with a jigsaw piece. Right now, none of the matching pieces were joining up, but she had a shrewd suspicion that when they did, the picture would rock everybody back on their heels. Rothwell Castle. There had been a shift change in the security team since Belle left for her interview with Karen Pirie, so the guard on duty at the gate had to clear her return via taxi with the castle. That knocked on the head any hopes of slipping back quietly. As she paid off the cab, the front door swung open to reveal a grim-faced Grant. Belle assumed a look of pleasure and walked towards him. No pleasantries today. "What did you tell her?" he demanded. "Nothing," Belle said. "A good journalist protects her sources and her information. I told her nothing." It was, technically, the truth. She had told Karen Pirie nothing. She hadn't had to. The inspector had come hurrying out of the building, pausing only to tell Belle she was free to go. "Something's just broken on another case I'm working. I've got to go to Edinburgh. I'll be in touch. You can go back to Rothwell as soon as you like," Karen had said. Then she'd given Belle a wink. "And you can put your hand on your heart and tell Brodie you didn't talk." Secure in the knowledge that she wasn't actually lying, Belle moved into the house, leaving him no choice but to grab her or follow her. "You're telling me you told her nothing, and she just let you go?" He had to extend his stride to its full length to keep up with her as she bustled down the hall to the stairs. "I made it clear to D.I. Pirie that I was not going to talk." She recognised there was no point in prolonging the stalemate. Belle glanced over her shoulder. "This isn't the first time in my career I've had to hold information back from the police. I told you there was no need to try and put the frighteners on her." Grant conceded with a nod. "I'm sorry, I didn't take you at your word." "So you should be," Belle said. She broke off to reach for her ringing phone. "Belle Richmond?" she said, holding a finger up to still Grant. A torrent of Italian poured into her ear. She made out Boscalata, then recognised the voice of the youth who had seen Gabriel and Matias the night Barrest had done a runner. "Slowly. Just take your time," she protested gently, switching to his language. "I saw him," the boy said. "Yesterday. I saw Gabe in Siena again, and I knew you wanted to find him, so I followed him." "You followed him?" "Yeah, like in the movies. He got on a bus, and I managed to sneak on without him seeing me. We ended up in Grevy. You know Grevy in Chianti." She knew Grevy. A perfect little market town stuffed with trendy shops for the rich English, redeemed by a few bars and trattorie where the locals still ate and drank. A meeting place for young people on Fridays and Saturdays. "I know Grevy," she said. "So, we end up in the main piazza, and he goes into this bar, sits down with a bunch of other guys about the same age. I stayed outside, but I could see him through the window. He had a couple of beers and a bowl of pasta, and then he came out." "Were you able to follow him?" "Not really. I thought I could, but he had a Vespa parked a couple of streets back. He went off down the road that heads east out of town. Near, but not near enough." "You did well," she said. "I did better. I left it about 20 minutes. Then I went into the bar he'd been in. I said I was looking for Gabe. I was supposed to meet him there. His mate said I'd not long missed him. So I went all innocent and said, could they direct me to his place, only I didn't know how to get there." "Amazing," Belle said, genuinely taken aback by his initiative. Grant started to walk away, but she beckoned him back. "So they drew me a map," he said. "Pretty cool, huh? Apparently it's like one step up from a shepherd's hut." "What did you do?" "I got the last bus home," he said, as if it was blindingly obvious. Which she supposed it was if you were a teenage boy. "And you've got this map?" "I brought it back with me," he said. "I thought it might be worth something to you. I thought maybe €100. "We'll talk about it. Listen, I'll get back as soon as I can. Don't talk to anybody except Grazia about this, okay?" "Okay." Belle ended the call and gave Grant the thumbs up. "Result," she said. "Forget the private eyes. My contact has discovered where Gabriel is living. And now I need to go back to Italy to talk to him." Grant's face lit up. "That's tremendous news. I'm coming with you. If this boy's my grandson, I want to see him face to face. The sooner the better." "I don't think so. This needs to be handled carefully," Belle said. From behind her, A voice chimed in. "She's right, Brodie. We need to know a lot more about this boy before you put your head over the parapet." Judith stepped forward and laid a hand on her husband's arm. "This could all be an elaborate setup. If these are the people who kidnapped Adam and robbed you 22 years ago, we know they're capable of the most cruel behaviour. We don't know anything else for sure. Let Belle handle it." Grant made a protest, but she shushed him. "Belle, do you think you can get a DNA sample without this young man realising?" "It's not so hard," Belle said. "One way or another, I'm sure I can manage it." "I still think I should go," Grant said. "Of course you do, darling, but the women are right this time, and you will just have to possess your soul in patience. Now, where's the plane?" Grant sighed. "It's at Edinburgh." "Perfect. By the time Belle's packed a bag, Susan will have arranged everything." She glanced at her watch. "You said you would take Alec fishing after school, so I can drive Belle over." She smiled at Belle. "Better get cracking. I'll see you downstairs in 15. Belle nodded, too gobsmacked to argue. If she'd ever wondered how Judith Grant held her own in her marriage, she'd just witnessed a spectacular demonstration. And short of throwing a temper tantrum, there was no way back for him. She turned and ran up the stairs, add another 0 to the advance. This was turning into the story of her career. Everyone who had ever dissed her was going to have to eat their words. It was going to be blissful. Okay, there was some tedious legwork to be got through, but there was always tedious legwork. There just wasn't always glory at the end of it. Kirkcaldy. Karen paced the floor, an unwavering 10 steps across the living room, then a swivel and 10 steps back. Usually, movement helped her to get her thoughts lined up in order. But this evening, it wasn't working. The jumble in her head was intractable, like herding cats or wrestling water. She suspected it was because, at some deep level, she was resisting the inevitable conclusion. She needed Phil here to hold her hand, while she thought the unthinkable. Where the hell was he? She'd left a message in his voicemail almost 2 hours ago, but he hadn't got back to her. It wasn't like him to go off radar. As that thought circled for the 100th time, her doorbell pealed out. She'd never covered the distance to the front door faster. Phil stood on the doorstep, looking sheepish. "I'm sorry," he said. "I went to the National Library in Edinburgh, and I had to turn my phone off. I forgot to turn it back on again until a few minutes ago. I thought it would be quicker to just come straight over." Karen was ushering him into the living room as he spoke. He looked around curiously. "This is nice," he said. "No, it's not. It's just a machine for living in," she said. "But it's a good one. It's relaxing. The colours all work with each other. You've got a good eye." She didn't have the heart to tell him it was someone else's eye. "I didn't ask you round to appreciate the decor," she said. "Do you want a beer or a glass of wine?" "I've got the car," he said. "Never mind that. You can always get a cab home. Believe me, you're going to need a drink." She thrust the photocopy of Belle's notes at him. "Beer or wine?" "Have you got some red wine?" "Read that. I'll be right back." Karen went through to the kitchen, chose the best of the half-dozen reds she had in the rack, unscrewed the cap, and poured 2 big glasses. The jammy spice of the Australian Shiraz tickled her nose as she picked up the drinks. It was the first external thing she'd noticed since she'd left the office. Phil had made his way through to the dining area and was sitting at the table, intent on the report. She put the glass down by his hand. Absently, he took a swig. Karen couldn't keep still. She'd sat down, then stood up. She went through to the kitchen and returned with a plate of cheese crackers. Then she remembered the sheet of paper that Mint had given her. She'd stuffed it in her bag without looking at it. She tracked her bag down in the kitchen. The Mint's notes weren't exactly the most clear or succinct that she'd ever read, but she got the gist of what he had found out. 3 of Kat's friends were clearly of no interest, But the forum message he'd copied out about Toby Ingalls leapt out at her with all the force of a coiled spring. Just like Kate Moss's book. But you'll never guess who we bumped into in a bistro in Perpignan. Only Toby Ingalls. You remember how he was going to set the world on fire? Be the next Olivier? Well, it obviously hasn't worked out quite the way he planned. He was pretty evasive when it came to the details. But he said he's a theatre director and designer. IMHO. He was being a bit economical with the truth. Brian said he looked more like a superannuated hippie. He certainly smelled like one, all patchouli and dope. We asked where we could see one of his productions, but he said he was taking a summer break. I was dying to do some more digging, but then this German woman arrived. I think she thought they were eating there, but he hustled her out of the door as fast as he could. I think he didn't want us talking to her and finding out the truth, whatever that is. So, after Perpignan, Karen reread the mint scrawl. Could this be Matias? It certainly sounded like the mysterious Matias, who hadn't been seen since he was spotted in Siena with Gabriel Porches. Another piece that appeared to belong with the jigsaw, but didn't seem to fit. Karen forced herself to breathe deeply, then joined Phil at the dining table. He'd spread the prints in front of him. He poked one with his finger to align it with the others. It's him, isn't it? He said. Adam? He flapped an impatient hand at her. Well, yes, of course it's Adam. It's going to be Adam. Not just because he looks like his mother and his grandfather, but because the man who's brought him up is Mick Prentice. Karen experienced a moment of weightlessness. The agitation stilled, and she could think straight again. She wasn't losing her mind or letting her imagination run away with her. Are you sure? Well, he's not exactly changed that much, Phil said. And look, there's the scar. He traced it with his fingertip. The coal tattoo through his right eyebrow, the thin blue line. It's Mick Prentice, I'll put money on it. Mick Prentice was one of the kidnappers. Even to her own ears, Karen sounded a bit wobbly. I think we both know he was more than that, Phil said. The registration, Karen said. Exactly. This was all planned even before Mick left Jenny. He'd set up his fake identity so he could start a new life. But there can be only one reason why he needed to set up a fake identity for Adam. He wasn't planning to ransom him at all, Karen said. Because he was Adam's father. Not Fergus and Clare. Mick Prentice. She took a gulp of red wine. It was a set-up, wasn't it? There were no anarchists, were there? No. Phil sighed. It looks like there were two miners, Mick and his pal Andy. You think Andy was part of the plot? Well, it looks that way. How else do you account for him ending up buried in the cave at just the right time? But why? Why kill him? He was Mick's best mate, Karen protested. If he could trust anyone, he could trust Andy. The way you guys operate, he could probably have trusted Andy more than Kat. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe he hit his head getting in or out of the boat. River said the back of his head was smashed in. That doesn't sound like an accident getting into a boat. Phil threw his hands in the air in a whatever gesture. Well, he could have tripped. Smacked his head on the quay. It was chaos that night. Anything could have happened. I'd put my money on Andy being the co-conspirator. And Kat? Was she part of the plan? Or was she the victim? Were her and Mick still an item? Or was he trying to get his kid and enough of Brodie Grant's money to set the pair of them up for life? Phil scratched his head. I think she was in on it, he said. If they'd split up, and he'd taken them both, she'd never have let Adam out of her arms. She'd have been too scared of him taking the bairn away from her. I can't believe they got away with it, she said. Phil gathered the prints together and straightened the edges. Lawson was looking in the wrong direction, and with good reason. No, I don't mean the kidnap. I mean the affair. Everybody knows everybody else's business in a place like Newton. Easier to get away with murder than an extramarital affair, I'd have said. So it looks like we've done what Lawson couldn't do. Solved the kidnapping. Track down Adam Grant. Not quite, Karen said. We don't actually know where he is, and there's a small matter of a lot of blood spilled in Tuscany, which could be his. Or it could have been spilled by him, in which case he's not going to be very keen on being found. There's one thing we haven't factored in, Karen said, passing Phil the result of the Mint searches. It looks like Matias, the puppeteer, might actually be a friend of Kat's from art college. Toby Ingalls has a description that you could stretch to cover Matias, the leader of the motley crew. Where does he fit in the picture? Phil looked at the paper. Interesting. If he was involved in the kidnap, it might be more than embarrassment at his less than glittering career that's making him keep a low profile. He finished his glass of wine and tipped it towards Karen. Any more where that came from? She fetched the bottle and refilled his glass. Any bright ideas? Phil took a slow mouthful. Well, if this Toby is Matias, he was an old pal of Kat's. Could be that's how he met Mick. It didn't have to be planned. He could have just turned up out of the blue when Mick was there. You know what artists are like. I don't, actually. I don't think I've ever met anyone who was at art college. My brother's girlfriend was, the one who's doing the makeover at my place. And is she prone to being unreliable? Karen asked. No, Phil admitted. Unpredictable, though. I never know what she's going to inflict on me next. Maybe I should have got you to do the job instead. This is definitely more easy on the eye. What I live for, Karen said. Easy on the eye. There was a charged moment of silence between them, and then she hastily cleared her throat and said, But here's the thing, Phil. If they'd met when Mick was with Kat, then ran into each other by chance in Italy, how the holy fuck did Mick explain what had happened to Kat, and how he'd ended up with the kid? So you're saying he must have been involved in the kidnap too? She shrugged. I don't know. I really don't know. What I do know is that we need to get the Italian police to find the person whose blood isn't on the floor of that villa, so we can ask some pertinent questions. Another tall order for the woman who put Jimmy Lawson behind bars. He raised his glass to her. I'm never going to live that down, am I? Why would you want to? Karen looked away. Sometimes it feels like a millstone around my neck, like the man who shot Liberty Valance. It's not like that, Phil said. You nailed Lawson fair and square. After somebody else did all the work. Just like this time, with Belle doing the legwork. You did the work that mattered, both times. We'd still be back at square one, if you hadn't had the cave excavated and the Nottingham guys properly questioned. If you're going to quote the movies, remember how it goes. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. You are a legend, Karen. And you deserve to be. Shut up. You're embarrassing me. Phil leaned back in his chair and grinned at her. Do they deliver pizza around here? Why? Are you buying? I'm buying. We deserve a wee celebration, don't you think? We've come a long way towards solving 2 cold cases, even if we're landed with Andy Kerr's murder as a sick kind of bonus. You order the pizza, I'll check out your DVDs. I should speak to the Italians, Karen said half-heartedly. With the time difference, it's nearly 8 o'clock there. Do you really think there's going to be anyone with any seniority around? You might as well wait till morning and talk to the guy you've been dealing with. Relax, for once. Switch off. We'll finish the wine, knock off a pizza and watch a movie. What do you say? Yes, yes, yes. Sounds like a plan, Karen said. I'll get the menus. Celladoria, near Greve in Chianti. The sun was heading for the hills, a scarlet ball in her rear-view mirror, as Belle drove east out of Greve. Grazia had met her in a bar in the main piazza and handed over the paper, directing her to the simple cottage where Gabriel Porches was living. Just over 3 kilometres out of town, she found the right turn indicated on the scrawled map. She drove up slowly, keeping an eye out for a pair of stone gateposts on the left. Immediately after them, there was supposed to be a dirt road on the left. And there it was, a narrow track weaving between rows of vines that followed the contour of the hill. You'd pass it without a second glance if you weren't looking for it. But Belle was looking, and she didn't hesitate. The map had a cross on the left side of the track, but it clearly wasn't drawn to scale. Anxiety began to creep upon her as the distance between the main road grew. Then suddenly, tinted pink by the setting sun, a low stone building appeared in her sights. It looked one step above complete dilapidation, but that wasn't unusual, even somewhere as fashionable as the Chianti-shire area of Tuscany. Belle pulled over and got out, stretching her back after hours of sitting. Before she'd taken a couple of steps, the plank door creaked open, and the young man in the photographs appeared in the doorway, dressed in a pair of cut-off jeans and a black muscle vest that emphasised evenly bronzed skin. His stance was casual, a hand on the door, the other on the jamb, a look of polite inquiry on his face. In the flesh, the resemblance to Brodie Grant was striking enough to seem eerie. Only the colouring was different. Where the young Brodie's hair had been as black as cats, Gabriel's was caramel-coloured, highlighted with sun streaks of gold. Other than that, they could have been brothers. "You must be Gabriel," Belle said in English. He cocked his head to one side, his brows lowering, shading his deep-set eyes even further. "I don't think we've met," he said. He spoke English with the music of Italian underpinning it. She drew closer and extended a hand. "I'm Belle Richmond. Didn't Andrea from the gallery in San Gimi mention I'd be stopping by?" "No," he said, folding his hands over his chest. "I don't have any of my father's work for sale. You've wasted your time coming out here." Belle laughed. It was a light, pretty laugh, one she'd worked on over the years for doorstep moments like this. "You've got me wrong. I'm not trying to rip off you or Andrea. I'm a journalist. I'd heard about your father's work, and I wanted to write a feature about him. And then I discovered I was too late." Her face softened, and she gave him a small, sympathetic smile. "I'm so sorry. To have painted those paintings, he must have been a remarkable man." "He was," Gabriel said. It sounded as if he begrudged her both syllables. His face remained inscrutable. "I thought it might still be possible to write something." "There's no point, is there? He's gone." Belle gave him a shrewd look. Reputation or money, that was the question now. She didn't know this lad well enough to know what would get her across the door. And she wanted to be across the door before she dropped the bombshell of what she really knew about him and his father. "It would enhance his reputation," she said. "Make sure his name was established. And that would obviously increase the value of his work, too. I'm not interested in publicity." He moved backwards, the door starting to inch closed. Time to throw the dice. "I can see why that might be, Adam." She'd hit home, judging by the swift spasm of shock that passed across his features. "You see, I know a lot more than I told Andrea. Enough to write a story, that's for sure. Do you want to talk about it? Or shall I just go away and write what I know without you having any say in how the world sees you and your dad?" "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Belle had seen enough bluster in her time to recognise it for what it was. "Oh, please," she said. "Don't waste my time." She turned and started to walk back to the car. "Wait," he shouted after her. "Look, I think you've got hold of the wrong end of the stick, but come in and have a glass of wine anyway." Belle swung round without a second's hesitation and headed back towards him. He shrugged and gave her a puppy dog grin. "It's the least I can do, seeing as you've come all the way out here." She followed him into the classic dim Tuscan room that served as living room, dining room and kitchen. There was even a bed recess beyond the fireplace, but instead of a narrow mattress, it housed a plasma screen TV and a sound system that Belle would have been happy to have installed in her own home. A scarred and scrubbed pine table sat off to one side near the cooking range. A pack of Marlboro lights and a disposable lighter sat next to an overflowing ashtray. Gabriel pulled out a chair for Belle on the far side, then brought over a couple of glasses and an unlabelled bottle of red wine. While his back was turned, she lifted a cigarette butt from the ashtray and slipped it into her pocket. She could leave any time now, and she would have what she needed to prove whether this young man really was Adam McLennan Grant. Gabriel settled down at the head of the table, poured the wine and raised his glass to her. Cheers. Belle clinked her glass against his. Nice to meet you at last, Adam, she said. Why do you keep calling me Adam? He said, apparently bewildered. He was good, she had to admit. A better dissembler than Harry, who'd never been able to stop his cheeks pinking whenever he lied. My name's Gabriel. He took a cigarette from the pack and lit it. It is now, Belle conceded, but it's not your real name, any more than Daniel Porches was your father's real name. He gave a half laugh, flipping one hand in the air in a gesture of incomprehension. See, this is very bizarre to me. You turn up at my house, I've never seen you before, and you start coming out with all this, I don't mean to sound rude, but really there's no other word for it but bullshit. Like I don't know my own name. I think you do know your own name. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Whoever your father was, Daniel Porches wasn't his name. And you're not Gabriel Porches. You're Adam McLennan Grant. Belle picked up her bag and pulled out a folder. This is your mother. She extracted a photo of Cat Grant on her father's yacht, head back and laughing. And this is your grandfather. She added a publicity headshot of Brodie Grant in his early 40s. She looked up and saw Gabriel's chest rising and falling in time with his rapid and shallow breathing. The resemblance is striking, wouldn't you say? So you found a couple of people who look a bit like me. What does that prove? He drew hard on his cigarette, squinting through the smoke. Nothing in itself. But you turned up in Italy with a man using the identity of a boy who died years before. The pair of you showed up not long after Adam McLennan Grant and his mother were kidnapped. Adam's mother died when the ransom handover went sour, but Adam vanished without trace. That's pretty thin, Gabriel said. He wasn't meeting her eyes now. He drained his glass and refilled it. I don't see any real connection to me and my father. The ransom demand was made in a very distinctive format, a poster of a puppeteer. The same poster turned up in a villa near Siena that was being squatted by a puppet troupe, led by a guy called Matias. You've lost me. His eyes might be focused over her shoulder, but his smile was charm itself. Just like his grandfather's. Belle placed a photo of Gabriel at the Boscalata party on the table. Wrong answer, Adam. This is you at a party where you and your father were guests of Matias. It ties the pair of you to a ransom demand that was made for you and your mother 22 years ago. Which is more than suggestive, don't you think? I don't know what you're talking about, he said. She recognised a stubborn line of the jaw from her encounters with Brodie Grant. Really, she could leave now and rely on the DNA to do all that was necessary. But she couldn't help herself. The journalist instinct for running the game and gaining the scoop was too strong. Of course you do. This is a great story, Adam, and I'm going to write it with or without your help. But there's more, isn't there? There was nothing friendly in the look Gabriel gave her. This is bullshit. You've taken a couple of coincidences and built this fantasy out of them. What are you hoping to get out of it? Money from this Grant guy? Some crappy magazine story? if you've got any reputation at all, you're going to destroy it if you write this." Belle smiled. His feeble threats told her she had him on the run. Time to go for the throat. "Like I said, there's more. You might think you're safe, Adam, but you're not. There's a witness, you see." She left the sentence dangling. He crushed out his cigarette and immediately began fiddling with another. "A witness to what?" There was an edge to his voice that made Belle feel she was on the right track. "You and Matias were seen together the day before the Barres troop disappeared from the Villa Totti. You were at the villa with him that night. The next day they'd all gone, and so had you." "So what?" He sounded angry now. "Even if that's true, so what? I meet up with a friend of my father who's just died. Next day he leaves town with his crew, so fucking what?" Belle let his words hang in the air. She reached for his cigarettes and helped herself to one. "So, there's a bloodstain the size of a couple of litres on the kitchen floor. Okay, you already know that bit." She sparked the lighter, the flame's brightness revealing how much darker it had become in the short time since she'd arrived. The cigarette lit, she drew smoke into her mouth and let it trickle out of one corner. "What you probably don't know is that the Italian police have launched a murder hunt." She tapped the cigarette pointlessly against the edge of the ashtray. "I think it's time you came clean about what happened back in April." Thursday, 26th April, 2007. Villa Totti, Tuscany. Until the last few days of his father's life, Gabriel Porches hadn't understood his closeness to the man who had brought him up single-handed. The bond between father and son had never been something he'd thought much about. If he'd been pressed, polite, rather than passionate, was how he'd have characterized their relationship. Especially when he contrasted it with the dynamic rapport that most of his mates shared with their fathers. He put it down to Daniel's Britishness. After all, the Brits were supposed to be uptight and reserved, weren't they? Plus, all his mates had vast extended families, ranging vertically and horizontally through time and space. In an environment like that, you had to stake your claim or sink without trace. But Gabriel and Daniel only had each other. They didn't have to compete for attention, so being undemonstrative was okay. Or so he told himself. Pointless to acknowledge a longing for the sort of family he could never have. Grandparents dead, the only child of only children. He was never going to be part of a clan like his mates. He'd be stoic, like his dad, accepting what couldn't be changed. Over the years, he'd shut the door on his desire for something different, learning to bow to the inevitable and reminding himself to count the blessings that came with his solitary status. So when Daniel had told him about the prognosis of his cancer, Gabriel had gone into denial. He couldn't get his head around the thought of life without Daniel. This horrible information didn't make sense in his vision of the world. So he simply went on with his life, as if the news hadn't been delivered. No need to come home more often. No need to snatch at every possible opportunity to spend time with Daniel. No need to talk about a future that didn't contain his father, because it wasn't going to happen. Gabriel wasn't going to be abandoned by the only family he had. But finally, it had been impossible to ignore a reality that was bigger than his capacity for defiance. When Daniel had phoned him from the Policlinico Liscotti and said in a voice weaker than a whisper that he needed Gabriel to be there, the truth had hit him with the force of a sandbag to the back of the neck. Those final days at his father's bedside had been excruciating for Gabriel, not least because he hadn't allowed himself to prepare for them. It was too late for the conversation Gabriel finally craved, but in one of his lucid moments, Daniel had told him that Matias was keeping a letter for him. He could give Gabriel no sense of what the letter contained, only that it was important. It was, Gabriel thought, typical of his father, the artist, to communicate on paper, rather than face to face. He'd given his instructions for his funeral previously in an email. A private service, pre-arranged and paid for in advance, in a small but perfect Renaissance church in Florence. Gabriel alone to see him to his grave, in an undistinguished cemetery on the western fringes of the city. Daniel had attached an MP3 file of Gesualdo's Tenebrae Responsores for his son to upload to his iPod and listen to on the day of his burial. The choice of music puzzled Gabriel. His father always listened to music while he painted, but never anything like this. But there was no explanation for the choice of music. Just another mystery. Like the letter left with Matias. Gabriel had planned to visit Matias at the dilapidated villa near Siena, once the first acerbity of his grief had passed. But when he emerged from the graveyard, the puppeteer had been waiting for him. Matias and his partner Ursula had been the nearest to an uncle and aunt that Gabriel had known. They'd always been part of his life, even if they'd never stayed in one place long enough for him to grow familiar with it. They hadn't exactly been emotionally accessible either. Matias was too wrapped up in himself, and Ursula too wrapped up in Matias. But he'd spent childhood holidays with them, while his father went off for a couple of weeks on his own. Gabriel would end the holidays with suntan skin, wild hair and skinned knees. Daniel would return with a satchel bursting with new work from further afield. Greece, Yugoslavia, Spain, North Africa. Gabriel was always pleased to see his father, but his delight was tempered by having to say goodbye to the light touch of Ursula and Matias's childcare. Now the two men fell into a wordless embrace at the cemetery gates, clinging to each other like the shipwrecked to driftwood, not caring how unstable. At last they parted, Matias patting him gently on the shoulder. "Come back with me," he said. "You've got a letter for me," Gabriel had said, falling into step beside him. "It's at the villa." A bus to the station, a train to Siena, then Matias's van back to the Villa Totti, and hardly a word exchanged. Sorrow blanketed them. Bowing their heads and slumping their shoulders. By the time they reached the villa, drink was the only solution either of them could face. Thankfully, the rest of the burlesque troupe had set off earlier for a gig in Grosseto, leaving Gabriel and Matias to bury their dead alone. Matias poured the wine and placed a fat envelope in front of Gabriel. "That's the letter," he said, sitting down and rolling a spliff. Gabriel picked it up and set it down again. He drank most of his glass of wine, then ran a finger around the edge of the envelope. He drank some more, shared the spliff, and continued drinking. He couldn't imagine anything Daniel had to tell him that would need so much paper. It hinted at revelation, and Gabriel wasn't sure he wanted revelation right now. It was painful enough holding on to the memory of what he had lost. At some point, Matias got up and put a CD in a portable player. Gabriel was surprised by the same music he'd listened to earlier, recognizing the strange dissonances. "Dad sent that to me," he said. "He told me to play it today." Matias nodded. "Gesualdo. He murdered his wife and her lover, you know. Some say he killed his second son because he wasn't sure if he was really the father. And his father-in-law too, supposedly, because the old man was out for revenge, and Gesualdo got his retaliation in first. Then he repented and spent the rest of his life writing church music. Just goes to show. You can do terrible things and still find redemption." "I don't get it," Gabriel said, uneasy. "Why would he want me to listen to that?" They were already on the second bottle of wine and the third joint. He felt a little fuzzy around the edges, but nothing too serious. "You really should read the letter," Matias said. "You know what's in it," Gabriel said. "Kind of." Matias stood up and made for the door. "I'm going out to the loggia for some fresh air." "Read the letter, Gabe." It was hard not to feel there was something pretentious about a letter delivered in such circumstances. Hard to avoid the fear that the world would be changed forever. Gabriel wished he could pass. Leave it unopened and let his life move on unaltered. But he couldn't ignore his father's final message. Hastily, he grabbed it and ripped it open. His eyes watered at the sight of the familiar hand, but he forced himself to read on. Dear Gabriel, I always meant to tell you the truth about yourself, but it never felt like the right time. Now I'm dying, and you deserve the truth, but I'm too scared to tell you, in case you walk away and leave me to face the end by myself. So I'm writing this letter that you'll get from Matias after I'm away. Try not to be too hard on me. I've done some stupid things, but I did them out of love. The first thing I'm going to say is that, although I've told you a lot of lies, the one thing that is the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, is that I am your father, and I love you more than any other living soul. Hang on to that, when you wish I was alive, so that you could kill me. It's hard to know where to start this story, but here goes. My name is not Daniel Porches, and I'm not from Glasgow. My first name is Michael, but everybody called me Mick Prentice. That's who I used to be. I was a coal miner, born and raised in Newton of Weems in Fife. I had a wife and a daughter, Misha. She was 4 years old when you were born, but I'm getting ahead of myself here because the two of you have different mothers and I need to explain that. The one thing I was any good at, apart from digging coal, was painting. I was good at art school, but there was no way somebody like me could do anything about that. I was headed for the pit, and that was that. Then the miners' welfare ran a class in painting, and I got the chance to learn something from a proper artist. It turned out I had a knack for watercolours. People liked what I painted, and I could sell them for a couple of quid now and again. At least I could before the miners' strike in 1984, when folks still had money for luxuries. One afternoon in September 1983, I came off the day shift, and the light was amazing. So I took my paints up on the cliffs on the far side of the village. I was painting a view of the sea, through the tree trunks. The water looked luminous. I can still remember how it looked too beautiful to be real. Anyway, I was totally into what I was doing, not paying attention to anything else, and suddenly this voice said, "You're really good." And the thing that got me right away was that she didn't sound surprised. I was used to folk being amazed that a miner could paint a beautiful landscape, like it was a monkey doing it or something. But not her. Not Katrina. Right from that first moment, she spoke to me like I was on an equal footing to her. I just about shat myself, mind. I thought I was all alone, and suddenly somebody right next to me was speaking to me. She saw how freaked out I was, and she laughed and said she was sorry to disturb me. By then, I'd noticed she was bloody gorgeous. Hair black as a jackdaw's wing, bone structure like it had been carved with a flawless chisel, eyes set deep, so you'd have to get right up close to be sure of the colour. Blue like denim, by the way, and a big smile that could wipe out the sun. You look so like her sometimes it catches my heart and makes me want to cry like a bairn. So there I am in the woods, face to face with this amazing creature, and I can't find a word to say. She stuck her hand out and said, "I'm Katrina Grant." I practically choked myself, clearing my throat so I could tell her my name. She said she was an artist too, a sculptor in glass. I was even more amazed then. The only other artist I'd ever met was the woman who took the painting classes, and she was no great shakes. But I just knew Katrina would live up to the job description. She walked about with this ring of confidence, the sort of thing you only have when you're the real thing. But I'm running ahead of myself again. Anyway, We talked a bit about the kind of work we were interested in making, and we got along pretty well. I was just grateful to have anybody to talk to about art. I'd not seen much art in the flesh, so to speak, just what they had at Kirkcaldy Art Gallery. But it turns out they had some pretty good stuff there, which maybe helped me a bit in the early days. Katrina told me she had a studio and a cottage on the main road, and told me to come round and see her set up. Then she went on her way, and I felt like the light had gone out of the day. It took me a couple of weeks to build up to going to see her studio. It wasn't hard to get to, only a couple of miles through the woods, but I wasn't sure if she really meant me to come, or if she was just being polite. Shows how little I knew her back then. Katrina never said anything she didn't mean, and by the same token, she never held back when she had something to say. I went across to see her one day when it was raining and I couldn't get painting. Her cottage was an old gatehouse in the Weems estate. It was no bigger than the house I was living in with my wife and kid, but she'd painted it in vibrant colours that made the rooms feel big and sunny, even on a miserable grey day. But best of all was the studio and gallery she had out the back. A big glass kiln and plenty of working space, and at the other end, display shelves where people could come and buy. Her work was beautiful. Smooth, rounded lines, very sensual shapes, and amazing colours. I'd never seen glass like it, and even here in Italy, you'd be hard-pressed to find colours so rich and intense. The glass seemed to be on fire with different colours. You wanted to pick it up and hold it close to you. I wish I had a piece of hers, but I never thought I'd need part of her, until it was too late. Maybe one day you'll be able to track down something she made, and then you'll understand the power of her work. It was a good afternoon. She made me coffee, proper coffee, like you didn't find much in Scotland back then. I had to put extra sugar in. It tasted funny to me at first, and we talked. I couldn't believe the way we talked. Everything under the sun, or so it seemed. It was obvious from the first time she opened her mouth that day in the woods that she was a different class from me. But that afternoon, it didn't seem to make a lot of difference. We arranged to meet again at the studio a few days later. I don't think either of us had any notion there might be risks in what we were doing. But we were playing with fire. Neither of us had anybody else in our lives that we could talk to the way we could talk to each other. We were young. I was 28, she was 24, but back then we were a lot more innocent than you and your friends at the same age. And from the very first moment we met, there was electricity between us. I know you don't want to think about your mum and dad being in love and all that goes with it, so I won't trouble you with the details. All I will say is we became lovers soon enough, and I think for both of us, it was like coming out into bright sunlight after you've been used to electric lights. We were daft about each other. And of course it was impossible. I learned soon enough the truth about your mother. She wasn't just any nice middle-class lassie. She wasn't just plain Katrina Grant. She was the daughter of a man called Sir Broderick MacLennan Grant. It's a name that everybody in Scotland knows, like everybody in Italy knows Silvio Berlusconi. Grant is a builder and developer. Everywhere you go in Scotland, you see his company's name on cranes and hoardings. Plus he owns chunks of things like radio stations and a football club and a whiskey distillery and a haulage company and a chain of leisure centres. He's a bully as well. He tried to stop Katrina becoming a sculptor. Everything she did in spite of him. He would never have stood for her having a relationship with someone as common as a miner. Never mind a miner who was married to somebody else. And yes, I was married to somebody else. I'm not trying to excuse myself. I never meant to be a cheating bastard, but Katrina swept me off my feet. I never felt that way about anybody before or since. You might have noticed I've never been one for girlfriends. The thing is that nobody could ever match up to Katrina. The way she made me feel. I don't think anybody else could do that. And then she fell pregnant with you. You see, son, you're not Gabriel Porches. You're really Adam McLennan Grant. Or Adam Prentice, if you prefer that. When that happened, I would have left my wife for Katrina, no question. I wanted to, and I told her so. But she wasn't long out of a relationship that had been going on for years, on and off. She wasn't ready to live with me. And she wasn't ready for another fight with her father. I don't think anybody even suspected we knew each other. We were careful. I always came and went through the woods, and everybody knew I was a painter, so nobody paid any attention to me wandering about. So we agreed to keep things as they were. Most days we saw each other, even if it was only for 20 minutes or so. And once you were born, I spent as much time with the two of you as I could. By then I was on strike, so I didn't have work to keep me from you. I'm not going to do your head in by telling you all about the year-long miners' strike that broke the union and the spirits of the men. There's plenty of books about it. Go and read David Peace's GB84 if you want an idea of what it was like. Or get the DVD of Billy Elliot. All you need to know is that every week that passed made me long for something different. Some life where the three of us could be together. By the time you were a few months old, Katrina had changed her mind too. She wanted us to be together. A fresh start. Somewhere nobody knew us. The big problem was that we had no money. Katrina was making a pretty bare living from her glasswork, and I wasn't working at all because of the strike. She could only afford her cottage and studio because her mother paid the rent. That was a kind of bribe, to get Katrina to stay near at hand, so we knew her mum wouldn't be paying for us to set up home anyplace else. We couldn't stay put either. Me walking out on my wife and daughter, at the height of the strike, to go and live with somebody from the boss's class would have been seen as worse than being a scab. They'd have put bricks through our windows. So without a bit of money to get us started, we were screwed. Then Katrina had this idea. The first time she mentioned it, I thought she'd lost her mind. But the more she talked about it, the more she convinced me it would work. The idea was that we'd fake a kidnap. I'd walk out of my family, make it look like I'd gone scabbing, and hide at Katrina's. A few weeks later, you and Katrina would disappear, and her father would get a ransom note. Everybody would think you'd been kidnapped. We knew her father would pay the ransom, if not for her, then for you. I would take the money. You and Katrina would go back. Then a few weeks later, Katrina would take you away, saying she was too upset by the kidnapping to carry on living there. And we'd all meet up and start our life together. It sounds simple when you say it fast, but it got complicated, and things went to shit. As it turns out, your mother couldn't have had a worse idea if she'd spent her whole life working on it. The first thing we realised when we started making the detailed plans was that we couldn't do it with just two of us. We needed an extra pair of hands. Can you imagine trying to find somebody we could trust to join in with a plan like that? I didn't know anybody who would be mad enough to join us, but Katrina did. One of her old pals from the College of Art in Edinburgh, a guy called Toby Ingalls, one of those upper-class mad bastards who are up for anything. You've always known him as Matias, the puppeteer. The man who will have given you this letter. And he's still a mad bastard, by the way. He had the bright idea of making the kidnapping look like a political act. He came up with these posters of a sinister puppeteer with his marionettes and used them to deliver the ransom notes, as if they were from some anarchist group. It was a good idea. It would have been a better idea if he'd destroyed the screen he used to print them. But Toby's always thought he was 1 degree smarter than everybody else. So he kept the screen, and he still uses that same poster sometimes for special performances. Every time I see it, my bowels turn to water. All it would take is one person to recognise where it comes from, and we'd have found ourselves up to our necks in it. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. I really wasn't sure whether I should tell you all this, and Toby thought maybe it would be better to let sleeping dogs lie, especially since you'll be having to cope with me not being around anymore. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that you have a right to know the whole truth, even if it's hard for you to deal with. Just remember the years we've had together. Remember the good stuff. It's what redeems all the crap I did. At least I hope that's how it works. A very bad thing happened the night I left my wife and daughter. I walked out in the morning without saying anything about leaving. I'd heard there was a bunch of scabs going down to Nottingham that night, and I figured everybody would think I'd gone with them. I went straight round to Katrina's, and I spent the day looking after you while she was working. It was bloody cold that day, and we were going through a lot of wood. After dark, I went out to chop some more logs. This is hard for me. I haven't talked about this for 22 years, and still it haunts me. When I was growing up, I had 2 pals, like you and Enzo and Sandro. One of them, Andy Clare, had become a union official. The strike was hard on him, and he was off work with depression. He lived in a cottage in the woods about 3 miles west of Katrina's place. He loved natural history, and he used to walk the woods at night, so he could watch badgers and owls and that kind of thing. I loved him like a brother. I was chopping the wood when he came round the end of the workshop. I don't know who got the bigger shock. He asked what the hell I was doing, chopping wood for Katrina Confronting Grant. Then he twigged. And he lost it. He came at me like a madman. I dropped the axe and we fought like stupid wee boys. The fight's all a bit of a blur to me. The next thing I remember is Andy just stopping. Collapsing into me, so I had to put my arms around him to stop him falling. I just stared at him. I couldn't make sense of it. Then I saw Katrina standing behind him holding the axe. She'd hit him with the blunt end. But she was strong for a woman, and she'd hit him so hard, she'd smashed his skull. I couldn't believe it. A few hours before, we'd been on top of the world, and now I was in hell, holding the dead body of my best pal. I don't know how I got through the next few hours. My brain seemed to work independent of the rest of me. I knew I had to sort things to protect Katrina. Andy had a motorbike and sidecar combination. I walked back through the woods to his place and drove the bike back to Katrina's. We put him in the sidecar, and I drove down to the Thanes Cave at East Weems. There's a set of caves down there that have been used by humans for 5,000 years, and I was involved in the Preservation Society, so I knew what I was doing. I could get the bike right up to the entrance to the Thanes Cave. I carried Andy in the rest of the way, and buried him in a shallow grave in the back part of the cave. I went back a couple of days later and brought the roof down so nobody would find Andy. I knew where to get my hands on some pit explosives. My wife's best pal had been married to a pit deputy, and I remembered him boasting about having a couple of shots of dynamite in his garden shed. But back to that night. I wasn't finished. I drove the bike back through East Weems and along to the pit bing. I jammed the throttle open and let it pile into the side of the bing. The slag covered it while I stood there. I walked home in a total daze. Ironically, I ran into the scabs as they were setting off. I've no idea what I said to them. I was deranged. When I got to Katrina's, she was in a hell of a state. I don't think either of us slept that night. But by the time the morning came, we knew we had to go through with her idea. As well as wanting to start a new life, we needed to put some distance between Andy and us. So we started to make our plans. Ironically, Andy being dead solved one problem we'd had about faking the kidnap, where we could hide you and Katrina without anybody knowing. I hit on the idea of forging a note in Andy's handwriting in case any of his family came by to see why they hadn't heard from him. It wasn't a straight-out suicide note. I didn't want to upset them, so I left it kind of ambiguous. I know that sounds weird, but I'm telling it like it was, not trying to make myself look like the good guy. Like I said, I've done things I'm ashamed of, but I did all of them out of love. We let some time pass before we set up the kidnap, because we didn't want anybody making a connection between me leaving and the kidnap. Also, we wanted to be sure Andy's family had accepted he'd gone away and wouldn't be coming round on the off chance. I'm ashamed to say I forged a couple of postcards in his writing and went up north to post them after the New Year so they'd stay away from his cottage and not come looking to see if he was back. We needed to make sure we'd be safe there. On the day we'd agreed, the three of us went off to Andy's, with your toys and your clothes, and there we stayed until the night of the ransom handover. Toby wasn't around much. He was sorting out the boats. We decided to do the handover in a place where we could escape by boat. We told Grant not to tell the police, but we weren't sure if he'd stick to that. So we thought we'd leave the police flat-footed if we got away on the water. At the time, Toby was living on his father's boat, a 4-berth cabin cruiser. He knew about boats, and he'd decided we needed to make our getaway in an inflatable with an outboard engine. He knew somebody who had one up in a boathouse in Johnstown. He reckoned nobody would even notice it was missing until May. So that seemed like a good idea. Anyway, the night of the handover came and we set off. We'd agreed Katrina was going to get the money. Then we'd hand you over to her mother. We'd go off with Katrina, then the next day she'd turn up by some roadside, supposedly having been dumped once the kidnappers knew the ransom was the real thing. Meanwhile, I'd give Toby his third share. He'd go his own way, and I'd go mine, finding us somewhere to live and work up in the Highlands. Nothing went like it was supposed to. The place was crawling with armed police, though we didn't realise it. Toby had a gun too, though I didn't realise that either until we got out the boat at the rendezvous. And Grant had a gun. It was a recipe for disaster. And a disaster was what we got. Even after all this time, thinking about it makes me choke up. Everything was going to plan, but for some reason, Katrina's mum made a big performance about handing the ransom over. Grant lost the place and started waving his gun around. Then Toby turned off the spotlight, and the shooting started. Katrina got caught in the crossfire. I had night vision goggles from the army surplus, and I saw her fall, just a few yards away from me. I ran to her. She died in my arms. It was all over in seconds. She dropped the bag with the ransom when she was shot, and Toby grabbed it. I didn't know what to do. You were back by the boat, in your carry-cot. We'd planned to leave you there, but I knew I couldn't leave you. Not with your mother dead. I couldn't leave you behind for Grant to bring up in his image. So we ran for the boat. I got a hold of your carry-cot and threw it back aboard, and we got out of there as fast as we could. The only thing that went according to plan was what we decided to do to avoid anyone using tracking devices to follow us. The ransom was a mix of notes and uncut diamonds. We put the money in another bag that we brought with us and tossed the original over the gun wall. Then I dredged the bag with the diamonds through the sea. We figured the water would knock out any transmitter they might have put in amongst them. It seemed to do the trick, because there was nobody on our tail as we shot down the coast to Dysart, where Toby's boat had already been moored for a few days. It was just a few miles, so we got there before the helicopter was in the air. We could hear it and see it from the boat. After it had gone, Toby took the inflatable out of the harbour and sank it off the beach. Then we holed up there till dawn and set off on the morning tide. I was in a state of shock, to tell you the truth. A couple of times I was on the point of walking to the nearest police station and giving myself up. But Toby held himself together and saved all of us. It took us a few weeks to get to Italy. We laundered most of the money in automatic cash machines and casinos along the French coast. The lion's share of the ransom was in uncut diamonds, and we hung on to those. Once we got here, we split up. I left Toby with the boat, and I rented a house in the hills outside Lucca for a few months till I decided where I wanted to live. I don't remember much about that time. I was dazed with grief and guilt, and the terrible pain of losing Katrina. If it hadn't been for you, I might not have made it through. I still can't believe how it all went so wrong. I know you probably look at my life and think I had it pretty good. The ransom money bought us the house in Castelpino, and a bit left over that I've got invested. The income from that put the jam on the bread and butter I earned from the painting. I got to spend the rest of my life in a beautiful place, bringing up my son and painting things I wanted to paint without ever having to worry too much about money. The only reason that you can think I had it pretty good is that you never knew your mother. When she died, she took the light away. You have been the only real light in my life since then, and don't underestimate what a joy it's been for me to spend these years with you. It breaks my heart that I will not live to see what you achieve with the rest of your life. You're a very special person, Adam. I call you that because it's the name we chose together for you. There's one last thing I want you to do. I want you to make contact with your grandfather. I googled him last week for the first time. Sir Broderick MacLennan Grant. His friends call him Brodie. He lives in Rothwell Castle in Fife. His first wife, your grandmother, committed suicide 2 years after Katrina died. He's got a new wife now, and a son called Alec. So you see, you have a family. You have a grandfather, and an uncle, who's quite a few years younger than you. Make the most of them, son. You've got a lot of time to make up for. And you're enough of a man now to stand up to a bully like Brodie Grant. So now you know all. Blame me or forgive me, it's up to you. But never doubt that you were conceived and born in love, and that you've been loved every single day of your life. Take care of yourself, Adam. All my love. Your father, Mick the miner. Gabriel dropped the last sheet on top of the others. He went back to the first page and read it all again, aware that Matias had come back in at some point. It was like reading the synopsis of a movie, impossible to connect to his life. Too absurd to be true. He felt as if the foundations of his life had been removed, leaving him hanging in the air, like a cartoon character holding his breath for the inevitable catastrophic fall. Does Ursula know all this? He said, knowing it wasn't that important a question, but wanting to know the answer anyway. Some of it. Matias sat down heavily opposite Gabriel, another bottle of wine in his hand. She doesn't know who your mother was, or all of Daniel's story. She knows he set up a fake kidnap because he wanted to be with you and your mother. But she doesn't know about the shootout at the OK Corral. The flippancy of Matias's description of his mother's death gave Gabriel a jolt. Toby had a gun too. He gave a half-hearted snort of derision. All these years, I thought I was living among a bunch of old hippies with a load of outdated lefty ideals, and it turns out you lot are actually a bunch of criminals on the run after the worst kind of capitalist crime. He knew there were more important things to talk about, but he had to work his way round to them, like a dog faced with a hot dinner who starts off nibbling at the edges because that's all he can cope with. Toby had a gun too. You're looking at it all wrong, Gabe, my man, Matias said, fingers busy with another joint. Think of us as latter-day Robin Hoods, robbing the seriously rich to spread the money round more fairly. You and my dad, living the life of Riley, doing exactly what you want. How exactly does that further the fight against international capitalism? Gabriel didn't even try to keep the sneer from his face or his voice. If my grandfather had been supportive of my mother's art, none of this would have happened. Don't tell me you all did this for some higher purpose. You did it because you wanted your own way, and you saw how you could make somebody else pay for it. He waved the joint away impatiently. He didn't want to lose any of the shreds of clarity left to him. Hey now, Gabe, don't be rushing to judgment on us. Why not? Isn't that what the Giswald was all about? It's like the last thing he did was invite me to judge him. Should I see him as a killer, or as a man redeemed by his painting? Or redeemed by loving me and bringing me up the best he could? Gabriel scrabbled through the letter, looking for the last page. Here it is, in his own hand. Blame me or forgive me, it's up to you. He wanted me to make up my own mind about what you did. The heat of anger was spreading through him, filling him up and making it harder to be reasonable. Toby had a gun, too. And you should forgive him, Matias said. You doubt our motives, but I tell you, all he wanted was to make a life with you and Kat. Circumstances were against them. We just tried to redress the balance, that's all, Gabe. His easy complacency was like a goad to Gabriel. And when did that give you the right to make my choices for me? What are you talking about? You and Daniel. You chose what I got to know about who I am and when I got to know it. You kept me away from my family. You lied about my history, made me think all I had was Daniel and you and Ursula. You took away my chance of growing up knowing my grandfather. My grandmother might still be alive if she'd had me with her. Matias blew out a plume of smoke. Gabe, there was no going back for us. You think growing up under Brodie Grant's thumb would have been better than the life you've had? He snorted derisively. You wouldn't say that if you had any idea how tough he made Kat's life. He got up and fetched a block of dope and a sharp knife to cut off a fresh slice. But I don't, do I? Because I never got the chance to find out, thanks to you two and the choices you made for me. Gabriel slammed the flat of his hand down on the table. Well, I'm going to make up for lost time. I'm going back to Scotland. I'm going to find my grandfather and get to know him for myself. Maybe he's the ogre you and Daniel make him out to be. Or maybe he's just someone who wanted the best for his daughter, and judging by this... He batted the letter with his hand, making the papers flutter in the dim light. He wasn't so far off the mark, was he? I mean, my dad wasn't exactly a model citizen, was he? Matias dropped the knife and stared at Gabriel. I don't think going back is that great an idea. Why not? It's time I got to know my family, don't you think? And that's not the issue. Well, what is? Matias made a small, helpless gesture with his hands. They're going to want to know where you've been for the last 20-odd years. And that's kind of a problem for me. What's it got to do with you? Think about it, Gabe. There's no statute of limitations for murder or kidnap. They're going to come after me and put me away for the rest of my life. Toby had a gun, too. I won't tell them anything that implicates you, Gabriel said, contempt in the curl of his mouth. You don't have to worry about your own skin. I'll take care of that. Matias laughed. You really have no fucking idea who your grandfather is. You think you can just refuse Brodie Grant. He'll chase down your history. He'll backtrack and find out every move you've made all these years. He won't stop till he's nailed me to a fucking cross. This isn't just about you. This is my life. They were both shouting now, outrage and fear stoking the paranoia of dope and the abandon of alcohol. If he gets me back, why the hell would my grandfather care about you? Because he'll never give up the chance for revenge, so he doesn't have to take responsibility. Responsibility? Responsibility for what? For killing Kat? Even as he spoke, Matias's face stretched in horror. He knew the enormity of what he'd said as soon as the words were out of his mouth. Gabriel stared at him in disbelief. You're crazy. You're saying my grandfather shot his own daughter? That's exactly what I'm saying. I don't think he meant... Gabriel jumped to his feet, sending the chair crashing to the ground. "I can't believe you lying piece of—" "You'd say anything," he shouted incoherently. "You brought a gun. You're the one who shot her, aren't you? Not my grandfather. You. That's why you don't want me to go back, because you'll finally have to face what you did." Matias stood up, walking round the table towards Gabriel, hands outstretched. "You've got it so wrong," he said. "Please, Gabe." Gabriel's face was a mask of rage and shock. He reached down for the knife on the table and rushed Matias. Nothing in his mind but anger and pain, nothing as coherent as intent. But the result was as incontrovertible as if it had been the result of a meticulous plan. Matias crumpled and fell backwards, a dark red blemish quickly spreading to a stain across the front of his t-shirt. Gabriel stood above him, panting and sobbing, not caring to make any effort to staunch the blood. Toby had a gun too. Matias clutched at his failing heart as it slowly ran out of blood to pump around his body. His heaving chest gradually subsided till it grew motionless. Gabriel had no idea how long it took Matias to die, only that, by the end, his legs were so tired they could scarcely hold him up. He slumped to the floor where he stood, just beyond the margin of the slowly congealing pool of blood that had spread beyond Matias's body. Time drifted past. Finally, what roused him was footsteps and lively chatter approaching along the loggia. Max and Luca swaggered in, full of the success of the evening's performance. When they saw the gory tableau in front of them, they stopped short. Max cursed. Luca crossed himself. Then Rado walked in with Ursula. She caught sight of Matias and opened her mouth in a soundless scream, falling to her knees and crawling towards him. "He killed my mother," Gabriel said, his voice flat and cold. Ursula swung her head round to him, her lips curled back in a snarl. "You killed him!" "I'm sorry," he whispered. "He killed my mother." Ursula whimpered. No, it's not true. He couldn't hurt a fly." She stretched out her hand tentatively, her fingertips brushing Matias's dead hand. "He had a gun. It's in the letter. Daniel left me a letter." "What the fuck are we going to do?" Max yelped, breaking the macabre intimacy between them. "We can't call the cops." "He's right," Rado said. "They'll pin it on one of us. One of the illegals, not the painter's son." Ursula pressed her hands to her face, fingers splayed, as if she was going to claw her features apart. Her body heaved in a spasm of dry retching. Then somehow, she visibly drew her strength together, her face smeared with Matias's blood, like a terrible parody of night camouflage. She launched herself at Gabriel with a harrowing scream. Max and Luca instinctively threw themselves between her and Gabriel, dragging her back, keeping her clawing fingers from his eyes. Panting, she spat on the ground. "We loved you like a son," she wailed, then something in German that sounded like a curse. "He killed my mother," Gabriel insisted. "I wish he'd killed you," she screamed. "Get her out of here," Rado shouted. Max and Luca hauled her to her feet and half-carried her towards the door. "Pray I never see you again," Ursula screamed as she disappeared. Rado crouched beside Gabriel. "What happened, man?" "My dad left me a letter." He shook his head, dazed with shock and drink. "It's all over now, isn't it? He killed my mother. But I'm the one who's going to jail." "Fuck no," Rado said. "No way is Ursula going to the cops. It goes against everything she believes in." He put his arm round Gabriel. "Besides, we can't let her drag us all into this shit. No way I'm going back to where I came from. Matias is dead. There's nothing we can do to help him. No need to make things worse." "She's not going to let me get away with this," Gabriel said, leaning into Rado. "You heard her. She's going to want to hurt me." "We'll help her," Rado said. "We love you, man. And eventually she'll remember she does too." Gabriel dropped his head into his hands and let the tears come. "What am I going to do?" he wailed. Once his sobbing had subsided, Rado pulled him to his feet. "I hate to sound like a cold-hearted bastard, but the first thing you need to do is help me get rid of Matias's body." "What?" Rado spread his hands. "No body, no murder. Even if we can't keep Ursula away from the cops, they're not going to sweat if there's no body." "You want me to help you bury him?" Gabriel sounded faint, as if this was one step more than he could manage. "Bury him? No. Buried bodies have a way of turning up. We're going to carry him down to the field. Maurizio's pigs will eat anything." By morning, Gabriel knew Rado had been right. Thursday, 5th of July 2007, Celladoria, near Greve in Chianti. Remembering that night now, Gabriel felt as though Belle Richmond was hollowing his stomach out with a spoon. Losing his father had been bad enough, but Daniel's letter and what it had led to had been devastating. It was as if his life was a piece of fabric that had been ripped from top to bottom and tossed in a heap. If the letter had plummeted him into a state of turmoil, killing Matias had made matters infinitely worse. His father had not been the man he thought he was. His lies had poisoned so much. But Gabriel himself was worse than a liar. He was a killer. He'd committed an act that he would never have believed himself capable of, with such fundamental elements of his life exposed as a fantasy. How could he cling to any of it with confidence? He'd grown up thinking his mother was an art teacher called Catherine, that she died giving birth to him. Gabriel had struggled with that guilt for as long as he could remember. He'd seen his father's isolation and sadness, and had shouldered the blame for that too. He'd grown up carrying a weight that was completely bogus. He didn't know who he was anymore. His history had been just a story, made up to protect Daniel and Matias from the consequences of the terrible thing they'd been part of. For their sake, he'd been wrenched out of the country where he belonged and brought up on alien soil. Who knew what his life would have been if he'd grown up in Scotland instead of Italy? He felt cast adrift, rootless, and deliberately cheated out of his birthright. His torment was made worse by constant fear, shivering behind him like the backdrop in a puppet booth. Every time he heard the sound of a car, he was on his feet, back to the wall, convinced this time it was a carabinieri, come for him at Ursula's insistence. He tried to cover his tracks, but he didn't have his father's experience, and he was afraid he hadn't succeeded. But time had crawled past, and after a few weeks of being holed up like a sick animal, he had started to put himself back together. Gradually, he managed to find a way to distance the guilt, telling himself Matias had lived free and clear for over 20 years, never paying a penny of the debt that was owed for Katrina's death. All Gabriel had done was force him to make amends for the life he'd stolen from all of them, Katrina, Daniel, and Gabriel himself. It wasn't entirely satisfactory from the perspective of the morality Daniel had instilled in him, but holding fast to this conviction made it possible for Gabriel to attempt to move forward, accommodating his remorse and assimilating his pain. One overwhelming imperative drove him forward. He wanted to find the family that was his by rights, the clan he'd always craved, the tribe he belonged to. He wanted the home he'd been denied, a land where people looked like him, rather than escapees from medieval paintings. But he'd known he wasn't ready yet. He had to get his head straight before he attempted to take on Sir Broderick MacLennan Grant. The little he'd been able to glean from his father's letter, from Matias, and from the internet had left him certain that Grant would not give any claimant an easy time. Gabriel knew he needed to be able to hold his own and to keep his story straight in case that terrible April night ever came back to haunt him. And now it looked as if it had. Fucking Belle Richmond, with her digging, and her determination was going to destroy the one hope he'd been clinging to for the past weeks. She knew she was onto something. Gabriel hadn't had much to do with the media, but he knew enough to realise that now she had the threads of her story, she wouldn't give up till she had nailed him. And when she published her scoop, any hope he had of making a new life with his mother's family would be dead in the water. Brodie Grant wouldn't be happy to embrace a murderer. Gabriel couldn't let that happen. He couldn't lose everything for a second time. It wasn't fair. It so wasn't fair. Somehow, he remained composed, meeting her long, level stare. He had to find out exactly what she knew. "What do you think happened?" he said, a sneer in his face. "Or, should I say, what are you planning to tell the world happened?" "I think you killed Matias. I don't know whether you planned it, or it was a spur-of-the-moment thing, but like I said, there's a witness who can put you two together earlier that day. The only reason he hasn't told the police is that he doesn't understand the significance of what he saw. Of course, if I was to explain that to him, well, it's not rocket science, is it, Adam? It took me 3 days to find you. I know the Carabinieri have a reputation for being a bit slow in the uptake, so it might take them a bit longer. Time enough to get yourself under the protective wing of your grandfather, I'd have thought. Oh, but he's not your grandfather, is he? That's just my little fantasy." "You can't prove any of this," he said. He poured the last of the wine into her glass, then went over to the wine rack to fetch another. He felt cornered. He'd come through a terrible ordeal, and now this fucking woman was going to steal the one hope that had held him together. His challenge was his way of giving her a chance to prevent him having to do whatever it took to stop her. He glanced over his shoulder. Belle wasn't really paying attention to him now. She was absorbed in the chase, focused on turning the interview in the direction she sought. Absently, she said, "There are ways, and I know all of them." He'd given her the chance, and she deflected it. His past was corrupt beyond redemption. All he had left was the future. He couldn't let her take that from him. "I don't think so," he said, coming up behind her. At the last minute, some primitive warning signal hit her brain, and she swung round just in time to catch a flash of the blade as it headed unwaveringly for her. Kirkcaldy. After Phil made the first move, things had progressed at breakneck speed. Clothes stripped, skin to feverish skin, him on top, her on top, then to the bedroom, face down, his hands cupping her breasts, her hands clinging to the struts of the bedhead. When they finally needed to pause for a second wind, they lay on their sides, grinning stupidly at each other. "Whatever happened to foreplay?" Karen said, a giggle in her voice. "That's what working together all these years has been," Phil said. "Foreplay. You getting me all het up. Your mind's as sexy as your body, you know that." She slid a hand down between them and let her fingertips caress the soft skin below his belly button. "I have wanted to do this for so long." "Me too. But I really didn't want to fuck things up between us at work. We're a good team. I didn't want a chance spoiling that. We both love our work too much to risk it. Plus, it's against the rules." "So what's changed?" Karen said, a hollow feeling in her stomach. "There's an inspector's job coming up in Dunfermline, and I've been told unofficially that it's mine for the asking." Karen pulled away, leaning on one elbow. "You're leaving CCRT?" He sighed. "I've got to. I need to move up, and there's not room for another inspector in the CCRT. Besides, this way, I get to have you too." His face screwed up in anxiety. If that's what you want, obviously. She knew how much he loved working cold cases. She also knew he was ambitious. After she'd blocked his career path with her promotion, she'd expected him to go sooner or later. What she hadn't bargained for was that she might figure in his calculations. "It's the right move for you," she said. "Better get out quick, before the macaroon realises he should hate you as much as he hates me." "I'll miss working with you, though." He wriggled close to her, gently rubbing the palms of his hands against her nipples. There will be compensations, he said. She let her hand drift downwards. Apparently, she said. But it's going to take a lot to make it up to me. Boscolata, Tuscany. Carabinieri Nico Gallo crushed the cigarette under the heel of his highly polished boot and pushed himself off the olive tree he was leaning against. He brushed off the back of his shirt and his tightly fitting breeches and set off again along the path that bordered Boscolato's olive grove. He was fed up. Hundreds of miles from his home in Calabria, living in a barracks only marginally better than a fisherman's shack, and still getting the shitty end of every assignment. He could hardly get through a day without regretting choosing a career in the Carabinieri. His grandfather, who had encouraged him in his choice, had told him how women fell for men in uniform. That might have been the case in the old man's day, but it was the polar opposite now. All the women of his age he seemed to meet were feminists, environmentalists, or anarchists. To them, his uniform was a provocation of a very different kind. And to him, Boscolata was just another hippie commune inhabited by people with no respect for society. He bet they didn't pay their taxes. And he bet that the killer, who had claimed the unknown victim at the Villa Totti, wasn't far from where he was walking now. It was a waste of time, having a night patrol out here. If the killer had wanted to cover his tracks, he'd had months to do it. And even now, Nico reckoned everybody in Boscolata knew how to get inside the ruined villa, without him having a clue they were in there. If this had been his village back in the south, that's exactly how it would have been. Another round of the olive grove, and he was going back to his car for a cup from the flask of espresso he'd thoughtfully brought with him. These were the milestones that made it possible to stay awake and alert. Coffee, cigarettes, and chewing gum. When he got to the corner closest to the Villa Totti, he could have another cigarette. As the sound of his match died away, Gallo realised there was another noise on the night air. This far up the hill, the night was silent, but for the crickets, the odd night bird, and the occasional dog barking. But now the silence had been invaded by the straining sound of an engine climbing the steep dirt road to Boscolata and beyond. But curiously, it wasn't matched with the brilliance of headlights on full beam. He could make out pale glimmers through the trees and hedgerows, as if the vehicle was travelling on sidelights. Only one reason for that in his books. The driver was up to something he didn't want to draw attention to. Gallo glanced ruefully at his cigarette. He'd made sure he had enough for the night's duty, but that didn't mean he wanted to waste one. So he cupped it in his hand and moved closer to the villa, to cut off anyone attempting to enter the crime scene. It soon became clear he'd made the wrong choice. Instead of heading towards Boscolata and the villa, the light swerved off to the right at the far end of the olive trees. Cursing, Gallo took a last drag on his cigarette, then started down the side of the grove as quickly and as quietly as he could. He could just about make out the shape of a small hatchback. It stopped at the end of the trees, where the Totti property butted up against the substantial acreage farmed by the guy with the pigs. Maurizio. Wasn't that the old man's name? Something like that. Gallo, about 20 metres away, edged closer, trying not to make a sound. The car's interior light came on as the driver's door swung open. Gallo saw a tallish guy wearing dark sweats and a baseball cap get out and open the tailgate. He seemed to be dragging out a rolled-up carpet or something similar, bending down to get his body underneath to take the weight. As he straightened up, staggering a little under the weight of his burden, as he approached the sturdy wire fence that kept the pigs penned in, Gallo realised with a horrible lurch of his stomach that this wasn't an instance of midnight fly-tipping, but something much more serious. The evil fucker was about to feed a body to the pigs. Everybody knew pigs would eat bloody anything and everything, and this was indisputably a body. He grabbed his torch and turned it on. "Police, freeze!" he shouted in the most melodramatic style he could muster. The man stumbled, tripped and fell forward. his burden landing athwart the fence. He regained his feet and raced back to the car, reaching it seconds before Gallo. He jumped in and started the engine, throwing it into reverse just as Gallo hurled himself at the bonnet. The carabiniere tried to hang on, but the car was speeding backwards towards the truck, jouncing and jittering every metre of the way, and he finally slid off in an ignominious heap as the car disappeared into the night. "Oh, God," he groaned, rolling over so he could reach his radio. "Control, this is Gallo, on guard at the Villa Totti." "Roger that, Gallo. What's your 10? "Control, I don't know the 10 code for this, but some guy just tried to dump a body in a pig field." Friday, 6th of July, 2007, Kirkcaldy. The phone penetrated Karen's light sleep on the first ring. Dazed and disorientated, she groped for it, thrilled into full consciousness by the mumble of "phone" next to her ear. He was still here. No hit and run. He was still here. She grabbed the phone, forcing sticky eyelids apart. The clock read 5:47. She was CCRT. She didn't get calls at this time of the morning anymore. "D.I. Pirie," she grunted. "Morning, D.I. Pirie," a disgustingly bright voice said. "This is Linda, from Force Control. I've just had a Capitano di Stefano on from the Carabinieri in Siena. I wouldn't usually have woken you, but he said it was urgent." "It's okay, Linda," Karen said, rolling away from Phil and trying to get her head into work mode. What the hell could be 5:45 in the morning urgent on a 3-month-old maybe murder? "Fire away." "There's not much to fire, Inspector. He said to tell you he's emailed you a photo to see if you can ID it, and it's urgent. He said it 3 times, so I think he meant it." "I'll get right onto it. Thanks, Linda." She replaced the phone, and Phil immediately pulled her to him with a different kind of urgency. She squirmed round, trying to free herself from his grip. "I need to get up," she protested. "So do I." He covered her mouth with his and started kissing her. Karen pulled away, gasping. "Can you do quickies?" He laughed. "I thought women didn't like quickies." "Better learn how if you're going back in the front line policing," she said, drawing him into her. Feeling only mildly guilty, Karen logged on to her email. The promised message from Di Stefano was the latest addition to her inbox. She clicked it open and set the attachment to download while she read the brief note. "Someone tried to feed a body to Maurizio Rossi's Cinta di Siena pigs. Maybe this is where the other victim went. Here is a picture of the face. Maybe you know who it is." God, that was a nasty thought. She'd heard that pigs had been known to eat everything but the belt buckle when unfortunate farmers had had accidents inside their pens, but it would never have occurred to her to consider it as a means of body disposal. And then an even nastier thought occurred to her. Pig eats victim, pig incorporates human into its own meat, pig gets turned into salami, and people end up eating people. Somehow, she didn't think Maurizio Rossi was going to have much of a business left once this got out. Karen hesitated, wondering why Di Stefano thought she might recognise the victim. Could this be Adam McLennan Grant, his future with his grandfather, snatched from him at the last moment? Or the mysteriously disappeared Matias, a.k.a. Toby Ingalls? Anxiety dried her mouth, but she clicked on the attachment. The face that filled her screen was definitely dead. The spark that animated even coma patients was entirely absent. But it was still shockingly unmistakable. The day before, Karen had interviewed Belle Richmond, and now she was dead. A1, Firenze, Milano. There had been no reason to ditch Belle's hire car, Gabriel had decided. Not at this point. That mad bastard cop had shaken the living daylights out of him, but he couldn't have seen the license plate. Nobody would be connecting a car hired by an English journalist with what had happened on the Boscolata hillside. Putting distance between himself and Tuscany was the most important thing now. Leave the past and its terrible necessities behind. Make a clean break and drive straight into the future. It had been horrible, but he'd stripped the body partly to make it easier for the pigs to do his dirty work for him, and partly to make it harder to identify her in the unlikely event that she was found soon enough to make identification a possibility. As it had turned out, that had been a great decision. It had been bad enough when that crazy cop had appeared out of nowhere. It would have been 1,000,000 times worse if he'd left anything on the body that could make it easier to work out who she was. And so the car would be safe for now. He'd park it in the long stay at Zurich Airport and pick up a flight. Thanks to Daniel's insistence that there was nothing for him there but pain and ghosts. He'd never been to the UK before, had no idea what the security would be like, but there was no reason for them to look twice at him and his British passport. He wished he hadn't had to kill Belle. It wasn't like he was some stone-cold killing machine, but he'd already lost everything once. He knew what that felt like, and he couldn't bear it to happen again. Even mice fight when they're cornered, and he definitely had more bottle than a mouse. She'd left him no choice. Like Matias, she'd pushed him too far. Okay, it had been different with Matias. That time, he'd lost control. Realising that someone he'd loved since childhood had been his mother's killer, had cracked open some well of pain in his head, and he'd stabbed him before he even knew he had a knife in his hand. With Belle, he'd known what he was doing. But he'd acted in self-preservation. He'd been on the very point of contacting his grandfather when Belle barged into his life, threatening everything. The last thing he needed was her spilling the beans, linking him to Matias's murder. He wanted to arrive at his grandfather's house with a clean sheet, not have the life he'd been denied fucked up by some muck-raking journalist. He kept telling himself that he'd done what he had to do, and that it was good that he felt bad about it. It showed he was basically a decent person. He'd been ambushed by events. It didn't mean he was a bad person. He desperately needed to believe that. He was on his way to start a new life. Within days, Gabriel Porches would be dead, and Adam McLennan Grant would be safely under the wing of his rich and powerful grandfather. There would be time to feel remorse later. Rothwell Castle. Susan Charlson clearly didn't like the police turning up without prior invitation. The few minutes' notice between Karen's arrival at the gate and her presence on the front doorstep hadn't been quite long enough for Grant's right-hand woman to disguise her affront. "We weren't expecting you," replaced the welcome that had been applied previously. "Where is he?" Karen swept in, forcing Susan to take a couple of quick steps to the side. "If you mean Sir Broderick, he is not yet available." Karen made an ostentatious study of her watch. 27 minutes past 7, I'm betting he's still at his breakfast. Are you going to take me to him, or am I going to have to find him myself? "This is outrageous," Susan said. "Does Assistant Chief Constable Lees know you're here, behaving in this high-handed manner?" "I'm sure he soon will," Karen said over her shoulder as she set off down the hall. She threw open the first door she came to, a cloakroom. The next door, an office. "Stop that," Susan said sharply. "You are exceeding your authority, Inspector." The next door, a small drawing room. Karen could hear Susan's running feet behind her. "Fine," Susan snapped as she overtook Karen. She stopped in front of her, spreading her arms wide, apparently under the illusion that would stop Karen if she was seriously minded to continue. "I'll take you to him." Karen followed her through to the rear of the building. Susan opened the door onto a bright breakfast room that looked over to the lake and woods beyond. Karen had no eyes for the view, or for the buffet laid out on the long sideboard. All she was interested in was the couple sitting at the table, their son perched between them. Grant immediately stood up and glowered at her. "What's going on?" he said. "It's time for Lady Grant to get Alec ready for school," Karen said, realising she was sounding like a bad script, but not caring how foolish she felt. "How dare you barge into my home shouting the odds?" His was the first raised voice, but he appeared not to notice. "I'm not shouting, sir. What I have to say, it's not appropriate for me to say in front of a child." Karen met his glare, not backing down. Somehow, this morning she had lost what little fear of consequences she possessed. Grant gave a quick, nonplussed look at his son and wife. "Then we'll go elsewhere, Inspector." He led the charge to the door. "Susan, a coffee in my office." Karen struggled to keep up with his long stride, barely catching up as he stormed into a Spartan room with a glass desk which held a large spiral-bound notebook and a slim laptop. Behind the desk was a functional, ergonomically designed office chair. Filing drawers lined one wall. Against the other were two chairs Karen recognised from a trip to Barcelona, where she'd mistakenly got off the city tour bus at the Mies van der Rohe pavilion and had been surprisingly captivated by its calm and simplicity. Seeing them here grounded her somehow. She could hold her own against any big shot, she told herself. Grant threw himself into his chair like a petulant child. "What the hell is all this in aid of?" Karen dropped her heavy satchel on the floor and leaned against a filing cabinet, arms folded across her chest. She was dressed to impress in her smartest suit, one she'd bought from Hobbs in Edinburgh at the sales. She felt absolutely in control, and to hell with Brodie Grant. "She's dead," she said succinctly. Grant's head jerked back. "Who's dead?" He sounded indignant. "Belle Richmond. Are you going to tell me what she was chasing?" He attempted a nonchalant half-shrug. "I've no idea. She was a freelance journalist, not a member of my staff." "She was working for you." He waved a hand at her, the brush off. "I was employing her to act as press liaison, should anything come of this cold case inquiry." He actually curled his lip, which doesn't seem very likely at this point. "She was working for you," Karen repeated. "She was doing a lot more than press liaison. She wasn't a publicist. She was an investigative journalist, and that's precisely what she was doing for you, investigating." "I don't know where you get your ideas from, but I can assure you, you won't be having any more of them about this case after I've spoken to Simon Lees. Oh, be my guest. I'll enjoy telling him how Belle Richmond flew out to Italy on your private jet yesterday, how she picked up a hire car on your company account at Florence Airport, and how her killer was disturbed by the police, trying to feed her naked body to the pigs a couple of 100 yards from the house where Belle herself found the poster that kick-started this whole inquiry. Karen straightened up and crossed to the desk, leaning on it with her fists. "I am not the fucking numpty you take me for." She gave him glare for glare. Before he could work out how to respond, a young woman in a black dress arrived with a tray of coffee. She looked around uncertainly. "On the desk, lassie," Grant said. Somehow, Karen didn't think she was going to be offered a cup. She waited till she heard the door close behind her. Then she said, "I think you better tell me why Belle went to Italy. It's likely what got her killed." Grant tilted his head back, thrusting his strong chin towards her. "As far as I am aware, Inspector, Fife Police's jurisdiction doesn't stretch to Italy. This has nothing to do with you. So why don't you fuck off?" Karen laughed out loud. "I've been told to fuck off by better men than you, Brodie," she said. "But you should know I am here at the request of the Italian police." "If the Italian police want to talk to me, they can come here and talk to me. Organ grinders, not monkeys. That's my way. Besides, if this was in any way official, you'd have your wee boy with you taking notes. I do know my Scots law, Inspector. And now, as I previously requested, fuck off. Oh, don't worry, I'm going. But for the record, I don't need corroboration for a witness statement for the Italian police. I'll tell you something else for nothing. If I was your wife, I'd be seriously unhappy about all these women's bodies in your slipstream. Your daughter, your wife, and now your hired gun. His lips stretched back in a reptilian rictus. How dare you? In spite of her determination, Grant had got under her skin. Karen reached for her bag and drew out the scale map of the ransom handover scene. "This is how I dare," she said, spreading out on Grant's desk. "You think your money and your influence can buy anything. You think you can bury the truth like you've buried your wife and your daughter. Well, sir, I'm here to prove you wrong." "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." Grant had to force out his words between stretched lips. "The received account," she said, stabbing the map with her finger. "Kat takes the bag from your wife. The kidnappers fire a shot that hits her in the back and kills her. The police fire a shot that goes high and wide." She glanced up at him. His face was motionless, frozen in a mask of rage. She hoped her expression was giving as good as it got. "And then there's the truth. Kat takes the bag from your wife. She turns to take it back to the kidnappers. You start waving your gun around. The kidnappers plunge the beach into darkness. You fire." She looked him straight in the eye. "And you kill your daughter." "This is a sick fantasy," Grant hissed. "I know you've been in denial all these years, but that's the truth. And Jimmy Lawson is ready to tell it." Grant slammed his hand down on the desk. "A convicted murderer! Who's going to believe him?" His lip quivered in a sneer. "There's others who know you had a gun that night. They're retired now. There's nothing you can hold over their heads anymore. You could maybe get Simon Lees to shut me up, but the genie's out of the bottle now. It wouldn't hurt you to start cooperating with me over Belle Richmond's murder." "Get out of my house," Grant said. "Next time you come back, you'd better have a warrant." Karen gave him a tight little smile. "You can count on it." She still had plenty of shots in reserve, but this wasn't the time to fire them. Mick Prentice and Gabriel Porches could wait for another day. "It's not over, Brodie. It's not over till I say so." The about-to-be farmer, Gabriel Porches, had no problem entering the UK. The immigration official at Edinburgh Airport swiped his passport, compared his image to the photograph, and nodded him through. He had to stick with his old ID for the car hire too. This collision of past and future was hard to balance. He wanted to let go of Gabriel and all he had done. He wanted to enter his new life clean and unencumbered, emotionally, psychologically, and practically. He wanted no connection to his past life. No possibilities of awkward questions from the Italian authorities. Please God, his grandfather would accept that he wanted a clean break with his past. One thing was certain. He wouldn't have to exaggerate the shock and pain his father's letter had inflicted on him. He had to stop at a petrol station and ask directions to Rothwell Castle, but it was still only mid-morning when he approached the impressive front gate. He pulled up and got out, grinning at the CCTV. When the intercom asked who he was and what his business might be, he said, "I'm Adam McLennan Grant. That's my business." They kept him waiting almost 5 minutes before they opened the outer gate. At first, it pissed him off. His anxiety had reached an intolerable level. Then it dawned on him that you only took precautions like this when there was something serious to protect. So he waited. Then he drove into the pen between the two sets of gates. He tolerated the security pat-down. He didn't complain when they searched his vehicle and asked him to open his hold-all and his backpack so they could rummage around. When they finally let him through the inner gate and he caught his first glimpse of what he'd lost, his breath caught in his throat. He drove slowly, making sure he had his emotions under control. He wanted this fresh start so badly. No more fuck-ups. He parked on the gravel near the front door and climbed out of the car, stretching luxuriously. He'd been folded into seats for too long. He squared his shoulders, straightened his spine, and walked up to the door. As he approached, it swung open. A woman in a tweed skirt and a woolen jumper stood in the doorway. Her hand flew up to her mouth involuntarily, and she gasped, "Oh my God!" He gave her his best smile. "Hello, I'm Adam." He extended a hand. One look at this woman, and he knew the kind of uptight manners expected in this house. "Yes," the woman said. Training overcame emotion, and she took his hand in a firm grip and held it tight. "I'm Susan Charlson. I'm your I'm Sir Broderick's personal assistant. This is the most extraordinary shock. A surprise. Bolt from the blue." She burst out laughing. "Oh, listen to me, I'm not usually like this. It's just that, well, I never imagined I'd see this day." "I appreciate that. It's all been a bit of a shock for me too." He gently freed his hand. "Is my grandfather at home?" "Come this way." Susan closed the door and ushered him down a hallway. He'd been in some fine houses in Italy, thanks to his father's business. But this place was utterly foreign. With its stone walls and its spare decor, it felt cold and naked. But it didn't hurt to make nice. "This is a beautiful house," he said. "I've never seen anything like it." "Where do you live?" Susan asked, as they turned into a long corridor. "I grew up in Italy, but I'm planning on returning to my roots." Susan stopped in front of a heavy studded oak door. She knocked and entered, beckoning Adam to follow. The room, a book-lined bolt hole, was a blur to him. His total focus was on the white-haired man standing by the window, deep-set eyes unreadable, face immobile. "Hello, sir," Adam said. To his surprise, he found it hard to speak. Emotion that he hadn't expected welled up, and he had to swallow hard to avoid tears. The old man's face seemed to disintegrate before his eyes. An expression somewhere between smiling and sorrow engulfed him. He took a step towards Adam, then stopped. "Hello," he said. His voice choked too. He looked beyond Adam and waved Susan from the room. The two men stared hungrily at each other. Adam managed to get himself under control, clearing his throat. "Sir, I'm sure you've had people claiming to be Katrina's son before. I just want to say that I don't want anything from you, and I'm happy to undergo any tests, DNA, whatever, that you want. Until my father died 3 months ago, I had no idea who I really was. I've spent those 3 months wondering whether I should contact you or not. And well, here I am." He took Daniel's letter from the inside pocket of his one good suit. "This is the letter he left me." He stretched out his arm to Grant, who took the creased sheets of paper. "I'll happily wait outside while you read it." "There's no need for that," Grant said gruffly. "Sit down there, where I can see you." He took a chair opposite the one he had indicated and began to read. Several times he paused and scrutinized Adam, who forced himself to stay still and calm. At one point, he covered his mouth with his hand, his fingers visibly trembling. He came to the end and gazed hungrily at Adam. "If you're a fake, you're a bloody good one." "There's also this." Adam took a photograph from his pocket. Katrina sat on a kitchen chair, hands folded over the high curve of a heavily pregnant belly. Behind her, Mick leaned over her shoulder, one hand on the bump. They were both grinning. It had the slightly awkward look of something posed for the timer. "My mum and dad." This time, Grant couldn't hold back his tears. Wordlessly, he held out his arms to his grandson. Adam, his eyes wet, got up and accepted the embrace. It felt as if it went on forever and lasted no time at all. Finally they drew apart, each wiping their eyes with her hands. "You look like I did 50 years ago," Grant said heavily. You should still have the DNA test done, Adam said. There are some bad people out there. Grant gave him a long, measured look. I don't think they're all on the outside, he said, with an air of melancholy. Belle Richmond was working for me. Adam struggled not to show he recognised the name, but he could tell from his grandfather's face that he'd failed. She came to see me, he said. She never mentioned you were her boss. Grant gave a thin smile. I wouldn't say I was her boss, but I did hire her to do a job for me. She did it so well it killed her. Adam shook his head. That can't be right. It was only last night that I spoke to her. It's right enough. I've had the police here earlier. Apparently her killer tried to feed her to the pigs right next door to the villa, where your pal Matias was squatting, until about the time your father died. Grant continued grimly. And the police are also investigating a presumed murder there. That one happened about the time Matias and his little troupe of puppeteers disappeared. Adam raised his eyebrows. That's bizarre, he said. Who else is supposed to be dead? They're not sure. The puppeteers scattered to the four winds. Belle was planning to track them down next, but she never got the chance. She was a good journalist, good at sniffing things out. It sounds like it. So where is Matias? Grant asked. I don't know. The last time I saw him was the day I buried my father. I went back to the villa so he could give me the letter. I was upset when I realised he had known my real identity all along. I was angry and upset that he and my dad had conspired to keep me from you all these years. When I left, I said I didn't want to hear from him again. I didn't even know they'd left Boscolata. He gave a delicate little shrug. They must have fallen out with each other. I know the others sometimes got restive because Matias took a bigger cut of the take. It must have got out of hand. Somebody got killed. He shook his head. That's harsh. And Belle? What's your theory there? Adam had had a night drive and a flight to figure out the answer to that one. He hesitated for a moment, as if thinking about the possibilities. If Belle was asking questions around Boscolata, word might have got back to the killer. I know at least one of the group was having sex with someone who lived there. Maybe his girlfriend told him about Belle and they were keeping tabs on her. If they found out she was coming to see me, they might have thought she was digging too deep and needed to be got rid of. I don't know. I've no idea how people like that think. Grant's expression was as unreadable as it had been when Adam had first seen him. You're very plausible, he said. Some might say you're a chip off the old block. His face twisted, momentarily in pain. You're right about the DNA. We should have that done as soon as possible. Meanwhile, I think you should stay with us. Let us start getting to know you. His smile was disturbingly ambivalent. The world's going to be very interested in you, Adam. We need to prepare for that. We don't necessarily need to be entirely frank. I've always been a great believer in privacy. That had been a shaky moment when the old man had revealed Belle was in his pocket. His questions had been tougher than Adam had expected. But now he understood that a decision had been taken, a decision to opt for complicity. For the first time since Belle had walked through his door, the unbearable tension began to dissipate. Friday, 13th of July, 2007, Glenrothes. The latest summons to the macaroon's office wasn't entirely unexpected. Karen had been refusing to take no for an answer from him, since she'd had a terse email from Susan Charlson revealing the return of the prodigal. She badly wanted to talk to Brodie Grant and his murderous grandson, but of course she'd been warned off before she could even make her case to Lise. She'd known confronting Grant about his action on the beach all those years ago would bring repercussions. Unsurprisingly, Grant had got his retaliation in first. accusing her of desperately looking for somebody to charge with something in a case where all the criminals were dead. Karen had had to listen to the macaroon lecturing her on the importance of good relationships with the public. He reminded her that she had resolved 3 cold cases, even though nobody would be tried for any of them. She had made the CCRT look good, and it would be extremely unhelpful if she pushed Sir Broderick MacLennan Grant into making it look bad. When she'd raised the issue of Adam MacLennan Grant's possible involvement in 2 murders in Italy, the macaroon had turned green and told her to back off a case that was none of her business. Di Stefano had been in regular contact with Karen via phone and email over the previous weeks. There was, he said, plenty of DNA on Belle's body. One of the teenagers who lived at Boscolata had identified Gabriel, aka Adam, as the man he'd seen with Matias on the presumed day of the assumed murder at the Villa Totti. They'd found the house near Greve, where a man answering to that description had been living. They'd found DNA there that matched what was on Belle's body. All they needed, to bring a case before an investigating magistrate, was a sample of DNA from the former Gabriel Porches. Could Karen oblige? Only when hell froze over. Now, finally, the macaroon had summoned her. Marshalling her thoughts, she walked into his office without knocking. This time, she was the one who got the shock. Sitting to one side of the desk, at an angle to the macaroon, but facing the visitor's chair, was Brodie Grant. He smiled at her discomfiture. Friday the 13th, right enough. Without waiting to be asked, Karen sat down. "You wanted to see me, sir," she said, ignoring Grant. "Karen, Sir Broderick has very kindly brought us his grandson's notarized statement about the recent events in Italy. He thought, and I agree with him, that this would be the most satisfactory way to proceed." He brandished a couple of sheets of paper at her. Karen stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, a simple DNA test is the way to proceed." Grant leaned forward. "I think you'll find that once you've read the statement, it's clear that a DNA test would be a waste of time and resources. No point in testing someone who's manifestly a witness, not a suspect. Whoever the Italian police are looking for, it's not my grandson. And another thing, Inspector, my grandson and I will not be discussing with the media where he's been for the past 22 years. Obviously, we will be making public the fact that we have had this extraordinary reunion after all this time, but no details. I expect you and your team to respect that. If information leaks into the public domain, you can rest assured that I will pursue the person responsible and make sure they are held accountable." "There will be no leaks from this office, I can assure you," the macaroon said. "Will there, Karen?" "No, sir," she said. No leaks. Nothing to contaminate Phil's imminent promotion, or her own team. Lise waved the papers at Karen. "There you go, Inspector. You can forward this on to your opposite number in Italy, and then we can draw a line under our own solved cases." He smiled winningly at Grant. "I'm glad we've been able to clear this up so satisfactorily." "Me too," Grant said. "Such a pity we won't be seeing each other again, Inspector." "Indeed. You take care, sir," she said, getting to her feet. "You want to take very good care of yourself and your son. It would be tragic if Adam had to endure any more losses." Seething, Karen stalked out of the room. She steamed back to her own office, ready to rant, but Phil was away from his desk, and nobody else would do. "Fuck, fuck, fuck," she muttered, slamming into her office just as the phone rang. For once, she ignored it, but the Mint stuck his head around the door. "It's some woman called Gibson looking for you." "Put her on," she sighed. "Hello, Misha. What can I do for you?" "I just wondered if there was any news. When your sergeant came round a couple of weeks ago to tell me you were pretty sure my father died earlier this year. He said there was a possibility he might have had children that we could test for a match. But then I didn't hear from you." Fuck, 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 and fuck again. It's not looking hopeful, Karen said. The person in question is refusing to give samples for testing. What do you mean, refusing? Doesn't he understand? A child's life's at stake here. Karen could feel the emotional intensity down the phone line. I think he's more concerned about keeping his own nose clean. You mean he's a criminal? I don't care about that. Does he not get it? I'm not going to give his DNA to anybody else. We can do it confidentially. I'll pass the request on, Karen said wearily. Can you not put me in direct touch with him? I'm begging you. This is my wee boy's life at stake. Every week that goes past, he's got less and less chance. I do understand that, but my hands are tied. I'm sorry. I will pass the request on, I promise. As if she sensed Karen's frustration, Misha changed her approach. I'm sorry. I appreciate how hard you've tried to help. I'm just desperate. After the call, Karen sat staring into space. She couldn't bear the thought that Grant was protecting a murderer for his own selfish emotional ends. It wasn't exactly a surprise, given the way he'd covered up his own culpability in his daughter's death. But there had to be a way to get round this barrier. She and Phil had gone over their options so often during the past couple of weeks that it felt as if they'd worn a groove in her brain. They talked about stalking Adam, going for the publicly discarded Coke can or water bottle. They discussed stealing the rubbish from Rothwell and having River go through it till she found a match for the Italian DNA. But they'd had to concede they were not so much clutching at straws as at shadows. Karen leaned back in her chair and thought about the place where all this had started. Misha Gibson, desperate for hope, prepared to do anything for her child, just as Brodie Grant was for his grandson. The bonds between parents and children. And then suddenly, it was there in front of her, beautiful and cunning and deliciously ironic. Almost tipping herself onto the floor, Karen shot up straight and grabbed the phone. She keyed in River Wilde's number and drummed her fingers on the desk. When River answered, Karen could hardly speak in sentences. Listen, I just thought of something. If you've got half-siblings, you'd be able to see the connection in the DNA, right? Yes, it wouldn't be as strong as with full siblings, but you'd see a correlation. If you had some DNA and you got a sample that showed that degree of correlation, and you knew that that person had a half-sibling, do you think that would be enough to get a warrant to take samples from the half-sibling? River hummed for a moment. I could make the case, she said. I think it would be enough. Karen took a deep breath. You know when we got Misha Gibson's DNA to check against the cave skeleton? Yes, River said cautiously. Have you still got that? Is your case still open? If I was to say yes, what would your answer be? If your case is still open, I'm legally entitled still to have possession of the DNA. If it's closed, the DNA should be destroyed. It's still open, Karen said. Which technically it was, since the only evidence against Mick Prentice in the death of Andy Kerr was circumstantial. Enough to close the file, certainly, but Karen hadn't actually returned it to the registry, so it wasn't closed as such. Then I still have the DNA. I need you to email me a copy ASAP, Karen said, punching the air. She got to her feet and did a little dance round the office. 15 minutes later, she was emailing a copy of Misha Gibson's DNA to Di Stefano in Siena with a covering note. Please ask your DNA expert to compare these. I believe this to be the half-sibling of the man known as Gabriel Porches. Let me know how you get on. The next hours were a form of torture. By the end of the working day, there was still no word from Italy. When she got home, Karen couldn't leave the computer alone. Every 10 minutes she was jumping up and checking her email. How quickly it fades, Phil teased her from the sofa. Yeah, right. If I wasn't doing it, you would be. You're as keen as I am to nail Brodie's grandson. You got me banged to rights, Gov. It was just after 9 when the anticipated reply from Di Stefano hit her inbox. Holding her breath, Karen opened the message. At first, she couldn't believe it. No correlation, she said. No fucking correlation. How can that be? I was so sure. She threw herself down on the sofa, allowing Phil to cuddle her close. I can't believe it either, he said. We were all so sure that Adam was the killer. He flicked a finger at the anodyne statement Karen had brought home to show him. Maybe he's telling the truth, bizarre though it sounds. No way, she said. Murderous puppeteers following Belle through Italy. I've seen more credible episodes of Scooby-Doo. She curled up, disconsolate, head tucked under Phil's chin, when the new idea hit her. Her head jerked so suddenly he nearly bit through his tongue. While he was moaning, Karen kept repeating, It's a wise child that knows its father. What? Phil finally said. What if Fergus is right? Karen, what are you talking about? Everybody thought Adam was Fergus's kid. Fergus thinks so. He shagged Kat around the right time, just a one-off. Maybe she'd had a row with Mick, or maybe she was just pissed off because it was a Saturday night, and he was with his wife and kid and not her. Whatever the reason, it happened. Karen was bouncing on her knees on the sofa, excitement making her a child again. What if Mick was wrong all these years? What if Fergus really is Adam's dad? Phil grabbed her and gave her a resounding kiss in the forehead. I told you right at the start I love your mind. No, you said it was sexy. Not quite the same thing. Karen nuzzled his cheek. Whatever. You are so smart it turns me on. Do you think it's too late to ring him? Phil groaned. Yes, Karen. It's an hour later where he lives. Leave it till the morning. Only if you promise to take my mind off it. He flipped her over onto her back. I'll do my best, boss. Wednesday, 18th of July, 2007. Karen stretched out in the bath, enjoying the dual sensations of foam and water against her skin. Phil was playing cricket, which she now understood meant a quick game, followed by a long drink with his mates. He'd stay at his own house tonight, rolling home at closing time after a skinful of lager. She didn't mind. Usually she met up with the girls for a curry and a gossip, but tonight she wanted her own company. She was expecting a phone call, and she didn't want to take it in a crowded pub or a noisy restaurant. She wanted to be sure of what she was hearing. Fergus and Clare had been suspicious when she'd called him out of the blue to ask for a DNA sample. Her pitch had been simple. A man had turned up, claiming to be Adam, and Karen was determined to make every possible check on his bona fides. Sinclair had been cynical and excited by turns. In both states, he'd been convinced that he was the best litmus test available. I'll know, he kept insisting. It's an instinct. You know your own kids. It wasn't the right time to share River's statistic that somewhere between 10 and 20% of children were not actually the offspring of their attributed fathers, and in most of those cases, the fathers had no idea they weren't the dad. Karen kept falling back on appropriateness. Finally, he'd agreed to go to his local police station and give a DNA sample. Karen had managed to persuade the German police duty officer to have the sample taken and couriered directly to River. The macaroon would lose his mind when he saw the bill, but she was past caring. To speed things up, she persuaded Di Stefano to email a copy of the Italian killer's DNA to River. And tonight, she would know. If the DNA said Fergus was the Italian killer's father, she'd be able to get a warrant to take a sample from Adam. Under Scots law, she could have detained him and taken a DNA sample without arresting or charging him, but she knew her career would be over if she attempted to treat Adam McLennan Grant like any other suspect. She wouldn't go near him without a sheriff's warrant. But once his DNA was in the system, even Brodie Grant's power couldn't keep him out of the clutches of the law. He'd have to pay for the lives he'd cut short. Her thoughts stuttered to a halt when the phone rang. River had said 9 o'clock, but it was barely 7:30. Probably her mother or one of the girls trying to persuade her to change her mind and join them. With a sigh, Karen stretched to pick up the phone from the stool by the bath. "I've got Fergus and Clare's DNA analysis in front of me," River said. "And I've also got one from Capitano di Stefano." And Karen could hardly breathe. A close correlation, probably father and son. Thursday, 19th of July, 2007, Newton of Weems. The voice is soft, like the sunlight that streams in at the window. "Say that again?" "John's cousin's ex-wife. She moved to Australia, outside Perth. Her second husband. He's a mining engineer or something. Words tumbling now, tripping over each other, a single stumble of sounds. And she's back. That's what I'm telling you." Exasperated words, exasperated tone. A 25th school reunion. Her daughter Laurel, she's 16. She's come with her for a holiday. John met them at his mother's a couple of weeks ago. He didn't say anything because he didn't want to raise my hopes. A spurt of laughter. This from Mr. Optimism. And it's right. It's going to work. They're a match, Mum. Luke and Laurel. It's the best possible chance. And this is how it ends.
The end. You've been listening to A Darker Domain by Val McDermid, narrated by Ailey Fraser. If you have enjoyed this recording and would like to receive information on the latest audiobooks, please contact us at the address on the cover. We will be pleased to send you a catalogue of available titles.